Morning, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of hearing 27 in relation to natural hazards. Just before we start, could we just do a bit of a roll call for people that are in the virtual room? If you've been involved before, you don't need to introduce yourselves, but if you haven't been at our hearings previously, if you could just very quickly identify yourselves and who you're representing, please.
Good morning, Sir. Brianna Parkinson, appearing for Rangatahi Limited. I have with me Ben Inga and Ken Reid.
Thank you very much. Welcome. We've got one or two others that don't look that familiar, so I'll just give them the opportunity to speak up. I can see Mr. Cochrane might be trying to say something, but we can't hear you. We'll come back to Mr. Cochrane. His microphone's on, but there's no sound coming through.
Audio check.
There we go. That's got it. Morning, Mr. Cochrane.
Good morning. For Mary Dragway.
I think he said Mary Dragway.
I think so, yeah.
You did? Oh, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Couldn't hear you quite, but thank you for that. Mr. Parker, you're on mute. There you go.
Am I up?
No, I'm just wanting people that haven't been in our hearings before, and you may have been, just to introduce themselves.
I've been listening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is that everybody? I guess we'll find out soon enough if someone new pops up or somebody joins. All I want to say this morning before we start is to repeat what we've said prior to our other sessions on this topic. And they're two things, really. The first one is we appreciate that many of the people speaking to us today are lay people who probably don't do this very often and may not have done it at all. Please don't stress about this process. All we're here to do is to hear what you want to tell us, and if we don't understand something of what you have said, or if we want to understand something a little bit more or get something clarified, we'll ask. So be as relaxed as you can, and please not worry too much about things. The second thing I want to say is that we have read the material that's been pre-circulated. As a consequence of that, we're expecting people to give us what we're referring to as a highlights package that identifies the key points that they want to raise, and more particularly what it is they're wanting us as the decision makers on the district plan to do. So please don't read verbatim large tracts of what you've already sent to us. That's not particularly helpful to us. We're very keen for you to talk to us and tell us about the concerns that you have and what you want us to do about them. And we're anticipating that most people should be able to do that in up to about 10 minutes. Doesn't mean to say that if you've got something short and sweet to say, you need to pad it out to 10 minutes. But if you can try and think about that time frame when you do present to us, that would be very helpful. So I think with that by way of introduction, we're ready to go. I think probably for those people that are new, the panel should just briefly introduce themselves. My name's Phil Mitchell. I'm chairing these hearings, and if you have trouble finding me on the screen, that's why I've got the Golden Gate Bridge sitting behind me, not that I'm in San Francisco. The panel could just briefly introduce themselves, please.
Hello, I'm Jan Sedgwick. I'm an independent commissioner, and I'm also a Waikato District Councillor.
Good morning, Janet Gibb, a current councillor with the Waikato District and independent commissioner. Thank you.
Hello, Diane Fulton. I'm independent commissioner and a former councillor.
Morena koutou, Will Marg, independent commissioner.
Paul Cooney, Deputy Chair, Independent Commissioner.
Thank you, everybody. Right, I think we're ready to go. So our first submitter this morning is Mr. Barry, although I'm not sure if Mr. Barry's here.
I haven't yet to get in contact with him. He's provided no cell phone number, so I'll try emailing him.
Okay, thank you. Is Ms. Coulson here? Yes, she is. Just see. Ms. Coulson, if you could turn your video and sound on, that would be very helpful.
You want me soon?
Pardon me?
Tēnā koutou.
Good morning. So just when you're ready to present your submission to us, Ms. Coulson, we're ready to hear from you.
Oh, okay. I was not quite ready, but I will start. I'd just like to thank the committee for such an excellent Zoom process. You've handled yourself so well. It's such a broad subject and so much information has been shared, and I've found it extremely helpful. So well done, and thank you very much for that. My submission today is with regard to coastal erosion in the Wainui stream, and it's known also as the Opotoro Inlet. We've always just called it the creek, and it's the body of water off of Nihi Nihi Avenue. And I wonder if I can ask for your excellent map section to bring up that area, and it'll make what I'm going to say to you very clear.
What was the address, sorry?
So the addresses are 7 and 9 Nihi Nihi Avenue, but it's actually the 4th and 5th house to the left of Marine Parade Bridge. That's the road to the campground down here.
I think the maps work with street addresses, and we can zoom in or out to reorientate ourselves. So let's see how we go.
So I am the fourth and 5th house from the right of your screen. That one, yes, and the next one next to that.
Okay, thank you.
So these, I was really interested to hear Janet Gibbert's adoptive management strategies, where she quoted chapter 15.1.2.8.
Sorry, Ms. Coulson, sorry to interrupt you. Could I just ask, there's people that aren't speaking, if you could turn your microphones off, please, because we're getting quite a lot of background noise coming through, and it's just making us hard to hear Ms. Coulson. So whoever that is has still got their microphone on.
I know they do. I'll wait, sir.
Just if you wouldn't mind just waiting a moment while we get this sorted out. Because the screen is being shared, I can't.
I hear that.
100% of everybody on it. Let me just see who's got their microphone off, and I'll growl at them as necessary.
Sorted.
I think we're sorted now.
Okay, so
Just repeat what you've just mentioned there, please.
I'm just pointing out that that Peninsula Farm Limited, or who I'm submitting on behalf of today, are the owners of the 4th and 5th property to the right of your screen. So the one shaded in red and the one to the left of that.
Okay, thank you.
Those two. And they front onto a still water creek. I see that you've called it Raglan Harbor. It's actually a creek. On the other side of that creek is the airstrip, the Raglan airstrip. I'm sure you're all really familiar with this area.
Yes.
Yeah. So we were really interested to hear Janet Gibbert's adapted management strategies, where chapter 15.1.2.8 deals with seawall defense in terms of fixed structures, and where they cannot be ruled out, where they're recognized as effective. Both of those properties in question have these fixed structures in place. The one that you have highlighted now has a concrete wall that's been in since 1940s, I believe. And it's very effective. It's it has steps down into the water. It's a recreational platform for the launching of boats and kayaks, etc. The one to the left is a steeper, the number 9 Nihi Nihi, which is the property to the left of that, has a normal seawall defense, and that I mean big boulders. Do you know what I mean by that? It has,
Yes, yes, I think we do.
boulders. Yeah. So all that area that you've got outlined in white is defined as at risk. I've lived in this house, the house to the left, for 16 years. And yes, of course, there's erosion where the water meets the land. There's always going to be that. But my submission today has to do with reinforcement of those walls. And when I approach the council for that, I expect to have the benefit of your expertise and your assistance in making a plan on how to best do this. So that's what my submission is today, that I'd like to we wish to shore up the boulder wall. It is a high tide mark. And as we go ahead with aligning the boundaries and identifying boundaries, and without altering mine in any way, I would just like to shore up the existing. But I need the council's expertise and assistance to do that.
Is that, sorry to interrupt, but is that a reserve in front of your house?
No, sir, that's the high water mark. So it's the 8-meter Queen's chain is what I think it's usually referred to.
Where's your
Yeah.
property boundary as
I'm
such?
sitting
Is it the
right
white?
there.
Is it the white line?
Bring your cursor to where that white, yes, right there. Now
That's
come
the
to your
property
left
boundary.
your left a little bit, and that's where I'm sitting right now speaking to you.
Wow.
So that's your property boundary.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So does that mean that some of the property is outside the boundary?
Always has been. I bought this house that way in 2006.
Okay.
But that's, you say that's in front of your place is a Queen's chain, is it?
Well, we always called it the Queen. It was always referred to as the Queen's chain.
Could be.
It's now a
could-
coastal erosion zone and a hazardous area of hazardous risk.
But who owns it?
I believe the Queen owns it.
Okay. It could be an Esplanade Reserve. Maybe we can get clarification later about that.
Hmm. So my question to the council today, my submission is, would you assist me on and advise me and us on the shoring up of those existing sea defense strategies? This is not a wave situation. There's no waves in the creek. It's tidal, but it's very still and very little activity in there.
I think just to clarify what our role is, and our job is to hear submissions on the district plan, and our powers are to make decisions on the basis of what the objectives and policies of the plan should be and what the rules should be, and where the various lines on the map that you're showing us, or that Mr. Bell is showing us, where they should be. We're not, and that's our role, and it's confined to that. In terms of maintenance of assets and those sorts of things, that's not really our job. But there are a number of council staff that are advising us during the hearing process, and you will have heard from them on Monday if you were present then.
I was, yes.
And you will need to contact them around how the council might interact with you about your specific issue from an asset management point of view, as opposed to us in terms of what the district plan will say. Our job's not to give advice, and I don't mean that in a negative sense.
I understand that.
Our job is simply, in colloquial terms, is to set the rules within which people can and can't operate in the future. So you'll need to take up the specifics about maintaining the rock wall or the rock revetment with the council people. And I'm not sure who the most appropriate person to talk to in that regard is, but I suspect it'll be let me just make sure I give you the right name. I suspect, yeah, I thought it was. I suspect it'll be Ms. Nicholson, who is present today. I think, or was. Is Ms. Nicholson with us today at the moment?
She's present, yeah.
Can't see her on the screen.
Well, thank you very much.
Sorry, yes, I can. So look, I think we've noted your concern, and I think it would, if I could put it this way, your concern in relation to the matters that we are dealing with is that you would want the district plan to make it possible or appropriate for you to have that wall fixed or maintained or whatever. I think we understand that that's within our jurisdiction and our role to consider. But in terms of the specifics of what might actually be done on the ground, you'll need to talk to council staff, as I said before.
So I have talked to council staff and I've asked if I could go and shore up my defenses, and they've said, oh no, you can't do that. That's not your land. And I said, well, that's fair enough. It's your land in that case. Could you go and shore up the defenses? And they said, oh no, we can't do that unless you open it to the public. And I thought, so I've kind of come full circle with this. I will definitely get a hold of Mrs. Nicholson, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell.
No, we're not trying to be dismissive. I hope you don't think we're being dismissive of the issue
Not at all.
raised.
Not
it's
at all,
just
sir.
simply we've got a hat that we have to wear, and we're not allowed to wear other ones.
I understand that.
All right.
Mr. Chair, is that a sensitive area that's been hatched there, has hatched, or is it a high risk erosion area?
It's both, as I understand it. The one nearest the house is the sensitivity area, and the one in front of that is the high risk area.
Okay.
And then it looks like there's some other notations on it as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure what, I just need to check what they are. I think there's two sensitivities and one high risk, isn't there?
Yes.
Is that right, Ms. Nicholson?
Inundation.
There's inundation and erosion, and in front of that's the high risk one.
Yeah, no, that is correct.
And the high risk one's the pinky one with that's not continuous.
You have to tell me that.
And the sensitivity areas are the two behind that.
Yes, so the pink and the purple one closest to the water are the inundation areas. So there's a high risk and the coastal areas. And then further back towards the house, so further landward, there's a high risk erosion area and then a coastal sensitivity area.
Okay,
which is,
got it.
the only part that's over the property.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I understand.
So what status does the repair of an existing seawall have? What's the highest status?
So at the moment, we have a permitted activity for maintenance and repair of a legally established seawall.
Despite what
in some cases, I acknowledge that around Raglan there's quite a number of seawalls, and a lot of them have predate the RMA and probably predate any requirement for building consent. So I guess there's existing use rights there. There's obviously a bit of a process to try and prove that.
So we're looking at a permitted activity, notwithstanding what status, what zone it is.
It's permitted activity, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Any works greater than that, so any upgrading or any extension to or replacement of is a discretionary activity. In this particular case, there would have to be permission from the landowner, which I understand is the Waikato District Council along that reserve there.
Sorry, the owner was, you just cut out momentarily. Sorry, who was the owner? District Council or Regional Council?
I'm pretty sure it's District Council.
District
I
Council.
can't get into the program to check, but I'm pretty sure it's the Waikato District Council reserves through there.
Is it normal practice? I mean, in a situation like this, and I don't really want to personalise it to Ms. Colson's situation or get you to make any commitments on the fly, but if a landowner in a situation like this said, look, some of the rocks have moved, you know, there's a gap in the side and it needs to be fixed up. Council comes back and says, actually, yes, we acknowledge that it's our land, but we don't really want to do anything about it. And I'm not saying that is the case, but let's say it was. What's the council's view when a landowner like Ms. Colson comes along and says, look, I'm happy to do it myself and pay for it. I just want the rocks put back where they were when we started. Is that something that the council typically does?
I know that they have done in the past, but I am not sure that that it would be general practice. I think maybe special circumstances, but generally speaking, I would expect that our reserve team wouldn't do that as a matter of course.
Okay, and just also you mentioned that the permitted activity status was for lawfully established activities, and some of these protections are pretty old, and you said it's difficult to demonstrate whether existing use rights or not. Are you suggesting that the council is sort of demanding proof of the legality of these facilities, even if they're 50 or 60 years old?
Yeah, so I would expect that in a case like that, where the seawall was in place and aerial photographs, historic aerial photographs may be able to prove that. I mean, this is a case of proving existing use rights. It's always difficult to go back in time and try and find that historical evidence.
Shouldn't the rule be made more?
That evidence that they were in place at a certain date, and then I guess you'd at that point look at what the legislation was, whether there was a requirement to get some form of approval to construct the wall.
Seems
and
a
in a lot
very
of cases
heavy-handed
around Raglan,
approach.
a lot of the properties have built seawalls and then infilled up to the seawalls. So and there's kind of a reclamation of land through there around Lorenzen Bay. That's quite typical, but it's all historical.
Right. I mean, it just seems pretty onerous to require someone to, you know, go back 50 years to provide documentary proof that what 3 or 4 owners previously might have done. Or
no, I can't.
You know, it seems that if that's the way the rules intended to work, it's pretty onerous, and it's almost only a quasi permitted activity, if you understand what I mean. Because the demonstrating it's going to be, in some cases, I imagine, impossible to prove those existing use rights.
I guess for me, there's certain seawalls around Raglan that have been put in place fairly recently as well. So it can be a case of somebody just doing the works without consent, just going ahead with it. In which case
and I certainly appreciate that.
A legal structure. And I guess where they've been left in place and nothing's been done about them, then you're allowing a permitted activity to do works on a structure that's not legal.
Well, may not be legal.
May not be legal. And
that seems to be a bit of a burden on an owner 60 years after something was done.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt here, but I have photographs, some aerial photographs dating back to the 1950s that show the existing seawalls here in front of these 2 homes.
Well, I think that's good news that you do. Let's not protract this, because you do need to talk to the council team.
And
but I think the fact that you've got that information, I think, is helpful. Whether it gets you to the point of being able to convince the council to fix it or allow them to fix it on their behalf is something you'll have to discuss with them.
Just while we're on this topic, Mr. Chair, if I can just get some clarification, because I think there's other submitters making the same point about repairs. Ms. Nicholson, you've said maintenance or repair of an existing lawfare established structure is permitted. Is there, and you then say new walls are discretionary, as I understand it. What about upgrade? Is that a grey area that falls in between? Is there a distinction between maintenance and repair, upgrade and new walls?
So the discretionary activity rule does include upgrading. So we have, so it's a construction of a new coastal protection structure and or any extension to or upgrade or replacement of.
What are you looking at there? What rule?
Sorry, that would be so 15.7a.3, which are the discretionary activities. I'm on page 29 of the consolidated chapter, and it's D1.
Okay.
I suppose it's big. Oh.
Yeah, you've addressed it.
I suppose it is a bit of a grey area of when maintenance becomes an upgrade too. You know, if you put a rock back, presumably that's maintenance, but if you put another one in front of it, is that an upgrade or is that maintenance?
Yeah, no, I get your point. The other thing just to note is anything seaward of mean high water springs becomes requires a regional council consent. So there is it's a bit of a complex.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we probably can't take this particular submission any further. I think it's highlighted an issue, and we've at least made further contact between Ms. Coulson and council that she can perhaps explore later. But let's just see if there's any other questions from the panel. Mr. Marg?
No, nothing from me, thank you.
Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, no, thank you. No questions.
Ms. Gibb?
Nothing particular, just wondering if this is a urgent, serious concern of the submitter, or is it just a long-term strategy she's looking at?
A bit of each, but more of a long-term strategy, to be honest.
Thanks for that. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you.
And I don't have any further questions either. Thank you very much, Ms. Coulson.
Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name's Daniel Parker. I'm representing myself, my wife and my two kids. We own a property at 5 Flemings Way, which is off Old Taupi Road in Narrawahia, next to the Waikato River. Now, can I get the same sort of mapping brought up, please?
Yep, sorry, what was the address?
5 Flemings Way, which is off Old Taupi Road in Narrawahia. Some systems it's listed as Bruce's Way. Yep, that's us. All right. Our house is 143 square meters in size, so it's not overly large. I'm about 194 centimeters in height, which is 6'3". I can walk underneath the floor of our house as it is on piles. The majority of our property is marked as high flood risk in the proposed plan. My understanding is that the land elevations used in this map were derived from LiDAR data collected in 2007 and 2008, along with further data from 2010 and 2011, and that this data is accurate to about plus or minus half a metre. Our house was built in 2011 after this data was collected and does not take into account earthworks that would be being done on our property and neighbouring properties since. Since no one's been on site to establish the actual height of our property, I agree that there is a risk of flooding as we do live next to the river. But if our property is effectively going to be red zoned, I would like to know that this mapping is accurate. If we truly are high flood risk, then this will obviously affect our insurance and rateable property value. I would request that our property be reclassified as floodplain rather than high flood risk. We purchased this property in 2019, and there is no mention of it being a flood risk on our LIM report from that time. In the future, we would like to extend our house, possibly as much as 80 square meters, to give it a footprint of about 220 square meters. This extension would be no closer to the river than the current building, and its floor would be approximately the same height as the current house, which is approximately 2 meters above natural ground level. Now, if we look at that satellite view, the area I'm talking about is from the edge of the garage. So the garage is there, the left edge of that, all the way across to where the tree is at the front of the house. So extending by about 3 meters wide, and then the length of the house. It's approximately 80 square meters. Where is the increased risk in this situation? The human risk is the same, as it's the same family living there. The property risk is the same, as it is the same piece of land. The economic risk is different due to the increased size, but surely that risk is between me and my insurer. How is being allowed to extend a house by 15 square meters as proposed an acceptable risk, but 16 square meters or greater is unacceptable? The risk to the house from flooding or any other disaster is the same yesterday as it is tomorrow. Identifying a perceived risk does not reduce this risk. Drawing a line on a map does not reduce this risk. Reducing what we can do with our property does reduce our quality of living along with property value and insurability. I'm happy to take questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. That's very clear what your issue is, and I think it's fair to say it's not the first time during the course of the hearing that it's been raised by other people, so it's something that we are aware of. Let's just see though if there are any specific questions of you. Ms. Sedgwick?
No, as you say, it's very clear, and I do understand your concept entirely. Thank you.
Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, no, I don't have any questions, but yes, it's something that's going to have to be dealt with by us, and yeah, I can't ask any further questions on it. Thank you. I think we understand it well enough.
Mr. Marg?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Parker. I have no questions of you. Clearly understand your issue.
Ms. Gibb?
No, thank you. It's very clear what you're wanting. Thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
Well, what is the actual relief you're seeking here?
Currently, the proposed plan only allows for a maximum of 15 square meters to be added as an extension to a property, and that you can only do that extension once. So you can't do 15 square meters 1 year and 15 square meters after that. I'm wanting up to about 80 square meters. Now, my position is that the risk, if 15 square meters is acceptable, why is 16 square meters and greater not acceptable? The risk is sure, there's no comeback on the council that I can see where building an 80 square meter extension is any greater risk to them than a 16 square meter extension or a 15 square meter extension, which is allowed under the new proposed rules. So I'm concerned about the accuracy of the LiDAR. I would prefer that we were floodplain rather than high flood risk. And I would like the ability in the future to potentially build an extension greater than 15 square meters.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that. It raises the point whether an existing established house can be replaced or added on to without any type of limitation because the risk is already there. That's really the gist of it, isn't it?
Yes.
Could I just interrupt you for a moment? I would probably like to do the same as what I suggested with Tess Fleming yesterday, and actually talk with Mr. Parker about what the rules actually allow him to do.
Yes,
I think that would be, I think he would appreciate that, and so would we.
And I can do it at the same time as Tess if that suits.
Oh, really?
Oh, there you go, 2 for the price of 1.
Yeah, I hadn't got hold of Tess's phone number by yesterday, but I'll be doing that today.
You'll see we live on Fleming's Way.
Uh-huh.
And Tess's last name is Fleming.
Okay, thanks for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Parker. I think your point's well made. We understand it, and we wish you well in your discussions with Ms. Carter.
Thank you.
Which brings us to Pokeno Village Holdings, please. Mr. Scrafton.
Good morning, panel members.
Morning.
I've provided a primary statement of evidence and then a summary statement of evidence, and I intend to pick the highlight points out of my summary.
Thank you.
Fundamentally, I'm really covering 2 points. One is the use or not of integrated stormwater catchment management plan approaches. And the second relates quite nicely to the previous witness, which relates to the approach to hazard mapping. So if I start at paragraph 1.3 of my summary, and I'm going to steer through my summary statement, but I'll point to where I'm talking to if you want to read those sections.
That'd be helpful, thank you.
In my view, CMPs are a useful tool to support urbanization and to inform long-term plans in terms of necessary infrastructure requirements. And on reflection, when I was looking at my summary, I started thinking this is probably, evidence on this is probably more suited to the rezoning hearings, but the presence of policy 15.2.1.15 made me feel that this is actually quite relevant to this topic as well. And I do not, so if I just go to paragraph 1.5, I don't agree with the reporting officer that policy 15.2.1.15 and the associated rules are actually sufficient to adequately support a catchment-based approach to stormwater management. And I go on to set out a number of my concerns regarding the policy at paragraph 1.5, and that's A to E. And for brevity, I don't intend to repeat those, but jump to more what to do. So there is reference to a catchment management plan-based approach in the policy. There is certainly encouragement in the RPS, the Waikato RPS, around integrated catchment management planning as an approach. And in my mind, the policy that I referenced and what is a catchment management plan based approach aren't particularly consistent. So in terms of what to do, I think there needs to be a decision as to whether the district plan is to utilize or require catchment management plans, particularly for urbanization, particularly greenfield urbanization, possibly large scale developments. If that is the plan, and again, it is encouraged by the RPS, I think there needs to be guidelines in the plan in terms of what the information requirements would be for catchment management planning. There needs to be a clear approval or certification process of catchment management planning. And then I think that the policy 15.2.1.15 would need to be redrafted to reflect that. And in terms of examples of district plans and catchment management plans and associated policies, I've looked at Hamilton City Council, which is quite a comprehensive approach. They have a policy around CMPs, which essentially says 3 waters infrastructure is to be designed and constructed in accordance with an existing structure plan and relevant integrated catchment management plan. That's partnered with an information requirement, which is 1.2.2.6, which sets out clearly what's required for a management plan and how they should be developed and certified in that instance. Similarly, the unitary plan in Auckland defines an integrated catchment management plan and sets out the expectations and approval process for that as part of the structure planning process there. I can start for questions on that if you want. I can move into the second topic.
No, I think carry on and complete what you want to tell us, and then we'll see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Chair. So the second topic I wanted to cover was hazard mapping, and I touched on this in 1.6 in my summary statement. In its submission, Pokeno Village Holdings Limited requested at a minimum that non-statutory maps showing areas that warranted natural hazard risk assessments be included in the plan, noting that providing the maps as non-stat layers allows for regular updates to the maps to reflect changes in the environment without the need for a first schedule process, The reporting officer disagrees with this, noting a number of concerns, including an opinion that the flood modeling information is not uncertain. Now, look, from my experience, and I don't want to dwell too much on the accuracy or not of flood modeling, but from my experience, it is a problem. It was certainly a problem in the unitary plan. It was certainly a problem through the Hamilton City Plan development. But regardless of that, regardless of how accurate the modeling is, the environment changes over time, where a floodplain can be altered through land development. For example, if you build a stop bank, that will drastically alter what could alter what is a floodplain or overland flow path. So if I jump to paragraph 1.8, as I said, PVHL recommends that the floodplain mapping be retained as a non-statutory layer as opposed to a statutory layer to allow for those changes. I would recommend that if this approach is adopted, or actually even if this approach isn't adopted and there remains that layer, this is an option to consider. That an additional approach is to essentially provide a method or rule that essentially allows for a suitably qualified expert to confirm whether something identified in the maps as a floodplain is, or an overland flow path, is or isn't a floodplain or overland flow path. And if a letter can be provided to the council from a suitably qualified expert that confirms that, then the associated rules wouldn't apply. This is the approach adopted by the AUP, which essentially, to just give a bit more context to that approach, the AUP defines floodplains and overland flow paths, which are shown on a non-statutory GIS layer. And in those definitions, there is a note which essentially says that floodplains and overland flow paths are indicative only, and that a party may provide council with a site-specific technical report prepared by a suitably qualified person to establish the extent, depth, and flow characteristics of the floodplain and/or overland flow path. So essentially, through that process, if the expert confirms that a floodplain is not a floodplain, then the definition doesn't apply to that piece of land, and therefore they're not then required to go through the consenting requirements. So essentially, I guess my recommendations are twofold around the hazard mapping. One is, as put forward by PVHL, the option of start layers versus non-start layers. But the second point is the benefit of allowing for a ground proofing of floodplains, overland flow paths, or other hazard layers with the involvement of a suitably qualified person.
Thank you, Mr. Scrafton. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Ms. Gibb?
Yes, just to confirm that I got what you said, Mr. Scrafton, that the non-statutory layer of the hazard mapping is used with the HCC and the Auckland Unitary Plan?
I'm not sure about HCC. It is used in Auckland. It's essentially if you go into the planning maps in the Auckland plan, you have the option of going into the I think it's called ArcView, which is a GIS layer, which includes contours, floodplains, overland flow paths, and underground infrastructure and things like that. The benefit is if somebody does ground proof that an area is or isn't floodplain, then the council have the opportunity to update the GIS layer without having to go through the first schedule process.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. So was it the HCC that had the integrated catchment management based approach?
Correct. Yes. Well, they both councils do, but I would describe Hamilton City's approach as probably the most comprehensive I've seen. They have both a integrated catchment management plan approach for greenfield and brownfield areas, and they also include a water. Oh gosh, I can't remember the wording, but essentially a water management plan and process as well, which is a more integrated three waters approach. But the unitary plan, and there are other councils adopt a catchment management plan information requirement as generally part of greenfield development.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Mark.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Scrafton.
Mr. Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Scrafton. No, I'm pleased you've explained it as well as you have, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick.
Thank you. I just have one small query regarding 1.6 under hazard mapping of your very good summary, and thank you for providing that. In the final line of 1.6, the reporting officer disagrees with this recommendation, noting amongst other things that the flood modelling information is not uncertain. Now, I haven't gone back and checked that. Is that your interpretation of it, not uncertain?
That's a quote.
Okay, lovely. I will go and do my homework on that. Thank you.
I can probably find it's in my primary statement with a footnote from memory.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney?
Yeah, just a clarification. I just look at policy 15.2.115, flood ponding areas and overland flow paths. Overland flow paths are not defined in chapter 15 or in the definitions. Is that intended to be just a wider policy rather than confined to a flood pond area and floodplain areas? Is it intended to reach out wider than that when it refers to overland flow paths? Do you know?
Sorry, are you asking for my interpretation, or you're
yeah, just from your...
Okay. Yeah, I mean, from my experience, floodplains, overland flow paths, and flood ponding areas are quite defined areas. With or without a definition, I think that a suitable civil engineer would identify a overland flow path.
Yeah, okay.
But
no,
without sorry, I was going to say, without a definition, that could be open to interpretation and disagreement.
Yeah. Maybe we get the council to explain that it's intended to be wider than simply confined to the identified flood ponding areas, which there are 2, plus the flood plains. It just seems to be wider. Anyhow.
Yeah, I think it's conflating 2 topics, if I'm honest.
Okay. Thank you.
Just one thing from me, and it's just following on from what Mr. Cooney was asking you about, Mr. Scrafton. The Auckland Unitary Plan, as I understand it, has non-statutory layers for floodplains because they are indicative, but they're matters of design. They're not the sort of thing that says you can't build here. It just means that you've got to make sure that the flow path isn't blocked and so on and so forth. It's not a bar to development, as it were. But my recollection is, and I haven't gone back and checked it, but in terms of what might be called the hazard areas as opposed to overland flow paths, doesn't the unitary plan map those?
There are, I'm just jumping into the unitary plan now. There are different, definitely different approaches to different hazards.
Yes.
And I'm just looking through, just bringing up the
I know,
legend
I'm
now.
pretty sure coastal, I can't remember flooding, but I'm pretty like coastal, which I know isn't the point that you're making. They have a zoned approach to that, or a identifying specific lines on maps for them.
Yes, that's my recollection too. The various coastal areas are identified as various zones. I mean, I would say the one thing with one of the main differences with the unitary plan is that it is a unitary plan, so it's got the benefit of being able to kind of cover both regional and district matters. But I think that where there's more certainty with the mapping, such as coastal areas, zoning or an overlay is easier and more appropriate. Where something is, as I say, less accurate, well, not less accurate, but I guess more subject to change. Then I think,
okay, no, I understand.
Yeah.
Isn't the flip side of what you're saying though, by having everything requiring assessment, one, you need to be careful to make sure that whatever process is in place is robust and transparent and consistent.
Correct.
And second of all, that for people that are in the zone of, if you might call no hope, that you don't really want them to be having to spend a truckload of money to prove that even if they're going to be 5 meters underwater, that they have to get an engineer to tell them. So isn't there a bit of a trade-off between certainty and transparency and flexibility? Would you accept that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, and I think even the knowledge in in terms of that transparency, the knowledge of the AUP approach, where you can actually have that interpretation of the floodplain or overland flow path, it probably isn't well understood. Certainly wouldn't be well understood for lay applicants.
Okay.
But it's a helpful tool to essentially avoid unnecessary resource consents, really.
Right. No, I think I understand the point that you're making. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Stratton.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Hello.
Which brings us to Rangatahi. Ms. Parkinson, please.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Now, on behalf of Rangatahi, we have filed legal submissions and 2 summary statements from Mr. Inga and Mr. Reid.
Yes.
Just going to step through my submissions very quickly and address some of the points that were made by Ms. Nicholson in her opening address to the panel.
Thank you.
And then Mr. Inga is going to provide the panel with a brief introduction of the mapped hazard areas, so just sort of to locate you what we're talking about in Rangatahi Peninsula and how those relate to the coastal sensitivity area overlays. Mr. Reid will then do a site-specific assessment or information on the site-specific assessments and mitigation measures that are being put in place in Rangatahi through the development. So that's an ongoing process. And then Mr. Inga will address the relief which is sought, which is permitted activity status for some 25 lots and agreed changes that have been worked through. Starting paragraph 4 of my legal submissions, Rangatahi's submission is now primarily focused on the coastal hazard erosion overlays. The peninsula is not subject to the high risk areas and in terms of affecting development sites and not subject to inundation either. So in terms of the erosion overlay, Rangatahi is seeking permitted activity status for lots that have already gone through a subdivision consent and land use consent process and which are now subject to consent notices that record those conditions of consent. Rangatahi does support the approach proposed by the council with respect to coastal hazards, which enables development provided risk can be avoided or mitigated. And in my submission, Rangatahi is sort of ahead of the game and providing something of a model for how these provisions will be implemented going forward if they're carried into the operative plan. And Mr. Inga and Mr. Reid can give the panel some more detail about how that's occurring on the ground in Rangatahi as development in precincts A, B and D is progressing. So Rangatahi is primarily concerned to avoid plan provisions that duplicate consenting requirements that were brought down through Plan Change 12 by requiring further resource consents for lots within the coastal sensitivity area erosion overlay, and those have already been through a consenting process, as I've said. Over the page, the agreed matters, I've listed those there, and Mr. Inga can take the panels through those if you want further detail on those. Paragraph 9, buildings in the coastal sensitivity area erosion. This is the one outstanding matter. Ms. Nicholson, in her opening presentation addressing the Rangatahi submission, has set out what I've sort of put under two headings. What's the purpose of the restricted discretionary activity land use consent, and then addressed what her view is on the adequacy of the measures that are in place, and she refers to consent notice. In terms of the purpose of the restricted activity land use consent, Ms. Nicholson refers to risks from climate change being assessed on a site-specific level, and where applicable, adaptive measures or other mitigation methods can be addressed through the conditions of consent. Rangatahi says that has already occurred in precincts A, B and D. There were site-specific assessments undertaken, and Mr. Reid can step you through those and the detail. There is a known outcome from that process. The erosion risk has been assessed, and as Mr. Reid will address or has addressed, that did include climate change considerations, not expressly, but in substance. So Mr. Reid has talked through what would be the applicable climate change risks for these sites, and confirms that those were taken into account as part of the geotechnical assessment. And that's led to conditions of the subdivision consent, which are recorded in a consent notice. Now, Ms. Nicholson has said that in her view, she's not convinced that the consent notice mechanism is sufficient to address future risk, particularly with regards to adaptive measures. Now, in terms of the consent notice, the panel is no doubt aware that that's imposed under Section 221 of the Resource Management Act. It's intended to capture conditions of subdivision consent that apply on an ongoing basis. So any subsequent development on the site, in this case, is subject to the geotechnical completion report and the requirements of that report, and it goes through further geotechnical assessment. And Mr. Reid can take you through that just to give you some sort of idea of what's happening on the ground in terms of addressing erosion risk. So I think it's important to sort of unpack what does the consent notice mechanism mean. It actually means that there are specific conditions which are being complied with on an ongoing basis and would apply to any future development on that land. So in present circumstances, we're talking residential or holiday home development. It would cover any future development. If someone wanted to put in a garage or a sleep out or a studio, that would all be covered by those conditions. Mr. Anger will also provide some details to the panel on what the specifics of those conditions are. So over on paragraph 10, page 4 of my submission, Rangatahi is seeking permitted activity status for the construction of new buildings and additions to existing buildings in the Rangatahi Peninsula Zone. This is an exception that's limited to 25 lots approximately that are partially affected by the coastal sensitivity area erosion overlay. And those 25 lots have all recently been through a subdivision consent process down at paragraph 13b. The land use and subdivision consents were granted in 2017 and 2018 for precincts A, B and D. Just highlighting the timing of those consents, we're only talking 3 to 4 years ago, and that did provide the opportunity to do those site-specific assessments looking at coastal hazards. They were looked at through a geotechnical lens and an erosion risk lens, but in my submission, it's the relevant risk for this land. There hasn't been other risks identified for this land. So that's the appropriate site-specific assessment. And the council in my submission is essentially asking to revisit those assessments that were only done so recently and would have been done with a view to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and the RPS, which incorporate climate change and require a 100-year timeframe. Over the page at D, Mr. Reid says that the geotechnical design requirements for specific design zones applied through those resource consents will ensure that the residential development in precincts A, B and D is resilient to geotechnical risks that may result from climate change. And Ms. Gibbard hasn't identified risks that haven't been assessed. So I've looked at her rebuttal evidence and her opening presentation to the panel, and I can't see in there any identification or disagreement with Mr. Reid that climate change risks have been appropriately addressed. So at 15, the recommended restrictionary discretionary consent will duplicate the processes that have already been followed. And Mr. Reid is of the opinion that the measures that are already in place, which he talks in terms of avoidance and mitigation, will appropriately address the risks of coastal erosion and geotechnical effects from climate change.
Ms. Parkinson, I just want to pause you there briefly. We have read your submissions, and in large part, you're rereading them to us. I'm just going to encourage you to not summarise what the other witnesses will say and to read the paragraphs of your evidence, but simply to cut to the chase and get to the point, please.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So over the page, paragraph 18, Ms. Nicholson's adaptive measures in my submission are this managed retreat, which is one part of the toolbox of measures that can be taken, but it's not the only measures that can be taken. And really, sir, I think in conclusion, page 8, it's my submission that the council hasn't provided evidence to support undertaking any additional measures on this land, and I can leave the technical side to Mr. Reid to take the panel.
No, that would be helpful. And look, I simply mean we have read your submission, which has been, carefully written. We're very aware of the argument that you're making. So in cutting you short, we're not trying to short circuit the point that's been made, but I just really do want to stress that we are aware of what the issue is and we're aware of what you're seeking. So that was the reason for just hurrying things along a little bit. Just to make that very, very clear.
Concerns there, I understand that the panel has read through those, and that's good for us, helpful for us to know. So Ms. Ling is just going to take you to the coastal.
That would be great. What I'm just going to ask everyone's indulgence, if we could just have a 90-second break, pause in proceedings for a moment, and we'll resume with Mr. Inder just in a couple of moments, please. It won't be a moment. Thank you for that. Sorry for the interruption. Mr. Inder.
Yeah, good morning. I think you're confusing me with the traffic engineer, Dr. Mitchell, Cameron Inder, but Mr. Inger.
Oh, Inger, yes, I am. You're quite right.
It's all right, no problem at all. It's
I know,
before.
I do know, as they say, I do know who you are, though.
Yes, yes.
So my apologies.
No problem. Good morning.
Morning.
What I'm going to do is, as Parkinson alluded to, is just provide a brief introduction for context before you hear from Mr. Reid.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to share my screen shortly and try and drive it from this end so that I can talk you through the peninsula. Obviously, you've had some background to the peninsula through, I think it was hearing 16 or something to that effect in December, the Rangatahi Peninsula Zone. Just to refresh your memories on that, the Rangatahi Peninsula is subject to a comprehensive structure plan. The structure plan and the related provisions were introduced into the operative plan through Plan Change 12, which was made operative in 2015, and that involved rezoning the land to Rangatahi Living Zone. The operative district plan requires precinct-specific assessments of coastal hazards. As part of the comprehensive development plan, land use consents prior to any development occurring. And obviously, as part of that process, regard is required to be had to the Waikato Regional Policy Statement and the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement in accordance with Section 104 of the Act. To date, resource consents have been granted under the operative district plan for precincts A, B and D, totalling 271 residential lots. That's out of a total of ballpark 550 lots that are anticipated within the structure plan. Titles for the first stages of development within precincts A and B were issued in June last year, and the first houses are currently being built as we speak out on the peninsula within those precincts. And construction of civil works for precinct D is underway. There's a further 79 titles within precinct D and a final stage within precinct B that are likely to issue in around August of this year. So the civil works for those precincts are nearing completion. And just a brief reminder that the Rangatahi Peninsula Zone is subject to a special purpose zone still under the proposed district plan, the Rangatahi Peninsula Zone. And obviously a significant change has been the introduction of the coastal hazard overlays through the proposed district plan, which I'll talk you through now. So I'm going to try and drive this. Are you able to see?
Not yet.
No, not quite.
Okay.
There we go. That's got it. Perhaps just blow that up a little bit, please, and get rid of the navigation stuff on the left.
I'll see if I can blow it up.
I think
it's a PowerPoint presentation. Perhaps I'll just talk to it.
I don't think it's in PowerPoint as such. I think that's your view as the operator of the show, isn't it? Because we can see the slides on the side, or perhaps even shrink that boundary between them because it's a bit hard to see at the moment. There we go. That's got it.
Okay.
That'll work. Thank you.
All right, so I'm not quite sure what you're saying, what I'm saying, but I'll try and talk you through it.
We're seeing the first of your two slides at the moment.
Okay, can you see red lines and yellow circles?
Yes, or ovals, yes.
Yes, okay. So this plan is from Annexure 1 of my evidence. What it shows is precincts A, B and D, which are highlighted in the red. And I had some fancy animations to highlight these sequentially, but the northernmost, which is on the left of your screen, is obviously precinct A. There's a label sitting beneath that. The precinct A, the area around there also includes some historic titles which pre-existed the Rangatahi Peninsula Structure Plan process. So they date back to between the 1950s and 1970s. And those titles are located at the northern end of the peninsula on the far left of the image that's shown. You can just see the bridge, the new bridge popping over into the peninsula there. So those are historic titles, but the balance of the site that you can see is Rangatahi development and part of the structure plan process. With this map, you can see the coastal erosion areas. So these are overlaid over the precinct A, B, and D consented layouts. The precinct C layout that's shown there reflects a bit of a work in progress where we're looking to apply for consents very shortly for precinct C. So that's the layout that's intended to be sought for precinct C. And then for precincts E, F, and G, which are further south or right on your screen, those layouts are shown as the structure plan layouts. What's highlighted in the yellow are areas where the coastal sensitivity area erosion encroaches into residential lots that have been consented. And those lots are affected to varying degrees. Some of them are substantially affected, whereas others it's just nicking the corner, for instance, of the lots. But there's approximately 25 of those lots that are affected to some degree by the coastal sensitivity erosion. You'll see through there the red line or the red hatched area is the high risk erosion areas. Ms. Gibbard explained on Monday to you that there was a revision to the slope of those areas, and while Rangatahi raised concerns in its submission about the impact of the high risk erosion areas, the recommended changes to those areas mean that they essentially avoid the residential lots. So the concerns that were raised in the submission would be addressed by the revised mapping. In terms of the balance of the site, you'll see that generally speaking, the hazard overlays don't impact on either the consented layout for, the forthcoming layout for precinct C that's due to be consented, or the remaining structure plan layouts. And I'm confident that with those subdivisions, we can avoid impacts on the crossovers with the overlays. So the issue really that's the focus of the submission now is precincts A, B, and D with respect to the coastal sensitivity area erosion. Hopefully you can see now a map that's titled Coastal Inundation Areas.
Yes, we can, thank you. That's the same as the Annexure 1 from your primary evidence, this current one, isn't it?
Yeah, so if you want to inspect it in detail, then probably best to have a look at Annexure 1. The point here...
What I might do, because my screen is showing, I can get that map to fill more of the screen than you seem to be able to do. So if you don't mind, how about I share my screen, because I think there's quite a bit of detail on this, and if you unshare your screen, I'll share mine and see if that, I'll just check with people that are watching whether this is a bit easier to follow than your one, which is a bit small. Is that any better?
Looks exactly Mr. Chair.
Hang on, sorry.
From map.
Oh, there we go.
How's that looking? Is that easier to read for people?
Yeah. I think it is.
Good. Well, that's at least one. I'll take that as a yes. Can you see that okay, Mr. Inga, in terms of saying what you want to say?
Yeah, I can. Thank you. One day I'll get the hang of it and it'll all run smoothly, but we're not quite there yet. So, in terms of this, the point I wanted to make with this plan is that, again, the coastal inundation areas are fairly confined to the coastal margin. That reflects that Rangatahi generally is relatively elevated above the coastal edge. So the coastal inundation areas really aren't a significant issue either for precincts A, B, and D, which have been consented, or for future precincts. There are a few areas where the overlays sort of come into the site, but they tend to be focused on gully type areas along the coastal margin, which obviously would be avoided by development in any case. So the inundation areas aren't a particular concern. That's all I wanted to share as far as the plans go, but I'm happy to take any questions. Perhaps we'll pause at this point if you've got any questions regarding the overlays and how they impact on the site.
No, I think that's clear. Let's hear from Mr. Reid, and then we'll have the full picture, and we can ask all of you whatever questions we have, and you can answer them amongst yourselves, as it were. How about we do that?
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reid.
Good morning, sir, and panel members.
Morning.
I'll briefly go over my summary of evidence, which looks at the methodology we've adopted in assessing geotechnical risk, and particularly of the coastal slopes at Rangatahi, and the measures that we've been recommending and are currently being followed on this precincts to mitigate the potential effects of slope instability. As you'll be aware from my initial evidence, and particularly the plans prepared and submitted in appendices B to G, there has been several phases of investigation and assessment across all three precincts. This is initially comprised of walkover and inspection of the coastal exposures around the coastline for all three precincts, coupled with geomorphological mapping of the slopes and terrain above the coastline. And in that, we've identified areas of historic, ongoing, and potential slope instability, which is indicated on the various geomorphological plans in those appendices. This was also supplemented by some boreholes and soil sampling to characterize the soil types. Although coastal slope sensitivity to climate change is not specifically mentioned or addressed in any of the reports prepared, the standard practice when we look at this is to allow for variations in moisture content in the soil. As soil gets wetter, it gets heavier and weaker, and so progressively slopes become potentially more unstable in periods of heavy rain or sustained storm events or extreme weather. And the thinking is that with climate change coming, those rainfall and extreme weather events are going to get more frequent. What happens is we firstly look at ongoing slopes and slips and recommend avoidance of those. We also look at where change primarily through moisture content can occur and zone the sites accordingly. The zones that we delineate are not areas where slips are definitely going to happen, but they're where there is a factor of safety against slippage less than that normally accepted, which is a safety of 1.5, where you have 50% extra strength in the soil than necessary to support the slope. What we then have identified in the geotechnical completion reports for those slopes is that there are areas into some of the lots and sections where the standard stability criteria are not met, and that's allowing for both existing conditions, a load implied by a building, and variation in the soil moisture content. The developer of those lots, therefore, when referring to the GCR, is alerted to that zonation. They have the option of restricting their work to outside that slope specific design zone, or if they encroach over it, having to take engineering measures to ensure that their dwelling and property is suitably protected from the potential effects of soil and ground movement. This is what's happening at present through the current consenting regime. The moment anyone purchasing and looking to build a dwelling on one of the affected sections has those options. Through the building consent process, they have to demonstrate that if they cross into one of our specific design zones, they take appropriate engineering measures to ensure the safety and longevity of the dwelling. And that is happening at present. I'm aware of several, we are being asked to provide that advice, and several other geotechnical businesses in and around Hamilton are also involved in that process. In that way, the development into these specific design zones is catered for. As you'll know from the evidence that's submitted, our specific design zones for slope closely mirror, and in one or two cases extend beyond, the coastal sensitivity zones submitted by the council. And in this way, I believe that we have actually addressed these issues on a site-specific basis in a form that caters for the potential geotechnical effects of climate change. As alluded to earlier, the philosophy adopted looking at the potential hazards of these zones is one of either avoidance, restricting development to outside that area, or mitigation, looking to do some form of improvement by engineering measures to reduce that risk of the hazard being realized. In that way, protecting the dwelling for the foreseeable future. That has generally taken the form of either reducing the ground level so that you're taking the load off the slope, or putting in some form of retaining measure, usually what we call a palisade wall, which is a line of piles completely embedded below ground level, which force any potential slip circles so deep that it's very unlikely to happen. And should anything happen on the coastal slope in front, would protect the dwelling from being affected by that. And therefore, we consider that that's an appropriate measure for these lots and sections.
Dr. Mitchell, I wonder up to you whether you want me to continue at this point and then round up questions at the end, or whether you'd like to ask.
No, I think we'll do it at the end. Then we've got the full picture, because I'm assuming you're now going to just run us through the specifics of what it is you're recommending. Yes. By way of plan provisions. I think it'd be helpful to round that off with that, and then we'll see if we've got any questions or not.
Okay, I agree. So just to be clear with the consenting process, you've got the site-specific assessments that Mr. Reid has just touched on. That then transferred into conditions that required detailed engineering design for earthworks to be approved by council, and then a condition that required a geotechnical completion report to reflect the recommendations of the for buildings on the individual lot. So it's a fairly typical process that results in notices that come down on the titles for these precincts. As Mr. Reid has explained, the site-specific assessments for precinct A, B and D have addressed coastal hazard risks, and the specific design zone requirements are in his view an appropriate response, including to address risks associated with climate change.
Yeah, look, Mr. Reid, I think we can skip to the provisions if you're happy with that. I think we understand what you've said, what Ms. Parkinson said, and broadly speaking what it is. So sure. Why don't you just come to the provisions?
I will, I'm going to attempt to share my screen once again. So I'll do that now. The reason I'm doing this is, oh, sorry, that's not the right document.
Is it the one attached to your primary evidence, or have you got another version?
I've got another version that I was wanting to share. So I'll just aim to do that.
Mr. Mathers, I think you've got your sound on and off and a bit of noise coming through. So you've turned it off again now. Thank you.
I'm sorry, it's not giving me the option to share the particular screen that I want to. So I'll just speak to what I was going to share to you. Rule 15.7.1 sets out the permitted activity standards.
Just before you do that, let me put up the version that's in your primary statement, because I think that's the latest version that we've seen.
There's a version that's attached to my summary statement.
Oh, to the summary statement. Sorry, yeah, you're right. Let me. That's what I was meaning. Sorry. Let me put that. Is that the one you were going to refer to?
It is. I've recommended a slight tweak to one of them.
Well, that's fine. Let me share that. Then you can. Then we're all on the same page, as it were. There we go.
Thank you. So the one outstanding rule that remains not in agreement is 1571P5, which is a new rule that I've suggested. You'll see elsewhere in this annexure, updated annexure, I've typed in green font the matters that are in agreement, and it's the vast majority of them. It's a remainder of the.
Yep, sure.
So in terms of this 1571, what I've recommended is a rule that relates to construction of new buildings or additions to existing buildings in the Rangatahi Peninsula zone, and I've referred to certificates of title created by subdivision consent granted prior to the date that this rule becomes operative. The refinement that I'm recommending to that is to provide a date range, and the reason for that is we're wanting to capture precincts A, B and D, but not other sites, because obviously A, B and D have been through this process. The historic titles that I referred to earlier on the peninsula that date back to 1950 to 70s, with the wording of the rule as you see it on the screen now, would otherwise be captured by this rule, and building on those lots would be permitted. They're not subject to the same consent notices. So that wasn't the intention. What I would like to do is suggest that the date range is bookended by the date that Plan Change 12 became operative, which is September 2015, and the date that this rule becomes operative. So it captures that time period when the operative district plan rules have had effect and consents have been granted under them. In terms of this standard, I've recommended an activity-specific condition here referencing compliance with consent notices. As Ms. Parkinson alluded to earlier, obviously compliance with consent notice requirements is a legal requirement under 221 of the RMA in any case. So I could say that that's somewhat redundant, but I've put it in to reinforce the rationale for the rule and the purpose of those consent notices, so that plan users are aware and there's a clear linkage back to the consent notice requirements. There's a consequential change to RD1 below that, just to reference P5, yes. So that it's not captured by that rule. Mm-hmm. But other than that, that's the extent of the change that I'm recommending to address the permitted activity standard. Ms. Nicholson spoke through the other changes that are shown in green on Monday, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I don't intend to go through them again.
No, I don't think we need you to, thank you. Look, I think we've got a very good understanding of what it is you're proposing and why. So I'm not anticipating that we're going to have vast quantities of questions, but it's always dangerous to make assumptions in this game. So I'll go around the room. Ms. Skip.
No questions, thanks.
Mr. Fulton.
Well understood, thank you.
Mr. Marg.
No, thank you. Thank you to all three of you.
Ms. Sedgwick.
I do have a question, and it's more of clarification for myself, and I think it's addressed to Mr. Reid, and that is with relation to slope stability. If that assessment is carried out at the time of development or the time of consent, would it be your opinion that that would need to be reviewed in the effect of climate change and just general sea change, if you like? Would there be a period at which that should need to be carried out again, or would you expect that sort of thing would be captured in a future district plan?
No, I wouldn't expect it to be carried out again. If the standard measures that we're recommending are taken, then any dwelling in there is going to be protected. The existing provisions are that if, for the sake of argument, that one of the lots wasn't developed for another 5 or 6 years, the provisions that are already there would require assessment of the conditions when the development actually happens. So if there were to be a change, then any new design works would be taken into account, and so it could be tweaked accordingly. But anything that's done now, for instance, a retaining wall or something, would be designed to allow for those changes or anticipated changes. So I'm confident that it would be caught.
Right, that's helpful. Thank you very much, and thank you for your submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton.
No, I had no further questions. I did answer. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Mr. Mark.
That's all right.
Sorry.
No, I have no questions either.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney.
Yeah, can you flick up one of those maps you showed earlier just to get a handle on the extent of the issue or problem that you say you've got? It just seemed to me
Hold on, I can do that.
the areas affected are not great. Can I just have a? Can you just show me?
I'll just give me a moment while I get it back. Whoops. Sorry.
You're nearly there.
Yeah, I'm nearly there. I've just got to get the right one. That's possibly the best one. Is it, Mr. Inger, or do you want the other one?
The other one would be good. That shows the inundation. The erosion one would be the one worth pulling up. Yeah, that one there.
Whoops.
So you mentioned in your evidence that the high risk coast erosion and inundation areas don't really affect your sections much at all, your lots. Is that correct?
That's right. The high risk areas generally, so what I should have mentioned before when I was talking to this is that there is a 20-metre coastal marginal strip that runs around the perimeter of the peninsula. So that's Crown land managed by DOC. And so a lot of the overlays, particularly the high risk ones, affect the marginal strip but don't protrude to any significant degree into the lots. There's a couple of lots within precinct D, sort of up near the top of the page, where the high risk erosion area just nicks into the sites, but they're away from likely building platform areas. So I'm not anticipating that anyone would be building down in those locations regardless.
Okay, and the coastal sensitive areas, margins, where they extend into your lots, do they?
Yeah, so that's the green areas.
That's the green area.
You'll see if you can move the cursor, Dr. Mitchell, slightly to the north. Sorry, to the up top of the page. Yeah, in there. Sorry.
We're about just here.
The road 7 that's marked on there, slightly to the left. Yeah, there. So that's a reserve on the end there, but the lots to the bottom of that, there's a few that are affected in there. There's one that's particularly affected, which is, yes, where you were, to the left a little bit, Dr. Mitchell, to the left and down, below the Whangaroa Harbour label.
Oh, sorry, way down here, way to the left. Yeah, sorry.
That's right. So that one's probably, there's one in there that's probably the most affected lot. But yes, Mr. Cooney, to varying degrees, the lots are affected. Some are just nicking it, whereas others, it's a more substantial portion of the lots.
And what percentage of those lots have already been built on?
I believe there are a couple of lots within precinct A where the coastal hazard overlay comes in. So upwards of the precinct A, the village label, there's a couple of lots in there, and I believe they have houses, but other lots don't, as far as I'm aware. Precinct B obviously hasn't been titled yet, so building on those lots.
Okay, that gives me a good appreciation of the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have no questions. Thank you to the three of you. That's been very helpful, and yeah, very helpful indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Barry here? No, I think we're going to call him a no-show. So I think on that basis, it's after 10:30 when we were due to break. We'll break now, and we'll resume at 5 to 11. I'm just wondering if if perhaps we could share a screen. I'm just thinking about people that are arriving at 1:45 that aren't necessarily here now, that may wonder what's happened to us if we're 10 minutes late.
organise that and put something on the screen.
I just wonder if we put something on the screen that we share that says back at 10:55 or something like that, just so that people that do join don't wonder what's happening.
Will they be able to see that if they haven't been let in?
I'm sure someone will
I can monitor it and let them in.
be able to monitor that. I think that would be really helpful. All right, well, we'll adjourn till 5:02. And for those of you that are here, if you could just mute your screens and turn the video off rather than
Start online. So that's the way I just have to wait for somebody to come on. Okay.
Yeah, we're not far away.
Yeah. Well, we have first Chris talking.
All right, thank you, everybody. I just check if the panel's all ready. I think Mr. Cooney may not be here. Just have to wait for a moment, please. Is Mr. Cooney there? Let me just check. His sound's on, but his video isn't. Here he comes. I think. Here we go. Very good. All right, thank you, everybody. We might get the recording back on too, please, Mr. Bell.
I think the recording was going that whole time.
Oh, was it? Okay. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll resume. We're due to hear first from Ohiniwai Lands, please, Mr. Toos.
Yes, good morning. Matthew Toos here. Hopefully you can all hear and see me.
Yes, we can, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I provided evidence in support of Ohiniwai Land Limited's further submissions, and that evidence was 16th of April. Just since then, I provided a summary statement, which with the leave of the commissioners, I'm happy just to read through and then obviously respond to any questions.
Yeah, I don't think you need to read through your summary statement necessarily, but you can take us through it, I think would be good.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I appreciate that as well. Yeah, so look, I think in a nutshell, the issues were well outlined in the council section 42A staff reports, and there was a tension there between the district and regional council outlining the quite extensive modelling and hydrological assessment works, and the response from a number of submitters, principally Department of Conservation and Mercury, wanting the insertion of stated limits, and that was ahead of both WDC and WRC completing the modelling for this particular part of the catchment. Now, Ohiniwai's lodged further submission relief points to a number of submissions. And in my summary of evidence at paragraph 4, I outlined the first one for Mercury Energy, where essentially they wanted that fixture point of 8 meters RL for the 1% AEPB. And just as stated, my view is that it really, which is also supported by the Council Reporting Officer, is that rather than inserting a metric such as that, is let's see where we get to with the modelling exercise. And that relief was supported by in Ms. Carter and the other staff reporting off this report. So the next one was around the high flood risk areas, and in para 8 of my summary, I outline what Mercury also sought there, which were along similar lines around this is the high flood risk areas within the overall flood management plan area. And the OL opposed this submission, and the 42A report recommended that the relief be granted in part, and OL's been rejected. Now there was just a minor point there around the clarification that Ms. Carter helpfully provided in her rebuttal evidence, and the conclusion there in paragraph 10 is that the OL further submission opposed the second part of Mercury's submission, and Ms. Carter's recommended that this further submission be accepted. So I think that addresses that one. The remaining one is an amendment to Chapter 15.1 introduction, where Ahenawai Land Limited sought further wording changes to the first para of the introductory text. And from reading through the response from the council staff in this council staff report, I'm of the same view essentially, and it's just that usual case of ensuring that the statutory language in the plan is clear, concise, and as direct as it needs to be. So in summary, Ahenawai Land is affirmatory of the changes recommended to you by in the council staff reports, and for those 2 points where it differs, my own position is that I'm supportive of the council position. But that's it in a nutshell in terms of a summary of the key points.
All right, thanks, Mr. Toos. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Ms. Gibb?
No, very clear, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Marg?
No, thank you.
Mr. Fulton?
Yeah, yeah, I have no questions. No, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick?
And none for me. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cooney?
Thank you. Thank you.
No, and I don't have any either. Thank you. It's that's very clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very
much. Thank you, Mr. Toos.
Okay, thank you, and good luck with the rest of the
Thank you very
hearing.
much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Our next submitter is Ambery Properties, Mr. Penfold.
Good morning. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Certainly can, thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Good morning, all.
Morning.
Yeah, so I guess just a very much conscious of highlights, and you'll note, I mean, APL submission is quite brief and to the point, but I guess just in terms of providing a bit of background, because obviously, as you know, through hearing 19, there was quite an extensive amount of evidence presented on the flood modelling and the proposed development. In some ways, APL are quite far advanced in their design work, so a lot of that modelling was informed by the design, which is quite helpful for rezoning, and obviously that influences, I guess, what I'm going to cover off this morning. So, I mean, that flood modelling work was undertaken collaboratively with the Regional Council and Mercury and others, including the Department of Conservation. And so we're essentially in agreement with Mercury around that 7.37 RL and the buffer, I guess you could say, that Mr. Webby discussed yesterday in terms of the 8 metre being the crest level. And so the Ambery development, which obviously is proposed, and we're certainly patient in terms of the panel's deliberations on hearing 19. But I guess I do have to make there is a presumption there that if that some of the comments made by me this morning will be sort of on the assumption that development goes ahead, because that is quite important in terms of the future development and proposed earthworks. But essentially, that modelling work showed that the effects on the lower Waikato Waipa river control scheme was negligible, right? And basically, the building platforms proposed in terms of the plan provisions account for the required freeboard above the 7.37. So we did have some draft plan provisions that talked about a 8.5 sort of finished floor for residential. So that provides the risk management, if you will. That's clearly sought by the plan change. So that work is also very much consistent with the policy framework that's in the proposed plan, and Ms. Carter has sort of outlined some sort of minor changes to some of those objectives and policies, and APL are supportive of those changes. In terms of the mapping, so this is, and I think Mr. Toe's highlighted, well, sort of just mentioned quite well that there's a bit of a tension there between the Regional Council and the District Council in Mercury in terms of the mapping of the floodplain. I mean, at the end of the day, APL have always acknowledged that their proposed development sits within the floodplain. That we're not getting away from that. It's more the I guess it's the flow-on effects of that, if you excuse the pun. I mean, it's what happens to the rural provisions down the track once Ambery, if successful in the rezoning, decides to develop that land. So for example, if the floodplain management area gets mapped in that area, then essentially certain activities will become discretionary as opposed to restricted discretionary. And so that, I guess that's just an administrative issue. However, it does, when we're well aware of the issues in terms of the effects on flood storage and so forth, that's already accounted for in the restricted discretionary rules in the proposed precedent zone as it is currently. And it could also be brought forward, if not already, in the restricted discretionary assessment criteria for Chapter 15. So also just to cover off, just to acknowledge that APL accepts Ms. Carter's position on the proposed amendments to policy 15.2.115. And that's really around the function of floodplains as they sit within, the function of floodplains in terms of an integrated catchment approach. So APL have clearly undertaken that integrated catchment planning as part of that rezoning exercise. So that's essentially a summary of APL's position in this. I mean, in terms of the mapping, I guess there's APL's neutral in terms of having the 7.37 mapped. However, it's we're just making the point that it does have flow-on effects for the activity status of certain activities.
Thanks, Mr. Penfold. Let's see if there's any questions. Mr. Fulton?
No, I don't have any questions. Well, I do have perhaps a query just from the Regional Council is this mapping, how far down the track? We saw the 3D mapping on some parts of the river that they showed us the other day, but it certainly is not being the 3D mapping that you're referring to at Ahewai. Is that right?
So was that a question for me? Sorry, Mr. Fulton.
Well, yeah, that's what you're referring to, isn't it?
Yeah, so I guess that is it's a very important point. I mean, APL has very much advanced its modelling on its site. So, you know, it's 178 hectares of detailed flood modelling in relation to a, you know, 3,400 and something hectares of wider catchment. My understanding, and obviously the regional council can confirm this, is that from what I've heard through the hearing, that they're expecting some more modelling to be completed by next year. But APL hasn't really had any approaches so far in terms of that modelling. But I mean, we would, it would seem efficient if they were to take on board some of our modelling that's already been undertaken.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mark?
Nothing from me, thank you, Mr. Penpole.
That's good.
No, nothing, but thanks for your submission.
Ms. Sedgwick?
Thank you, yes. Can I take you please to point 14, where you talk about the proposed policy 15.2.1.15, and you make the comment about maintaining the flood storage capacity of the floodplains, wetlands and ponding emphasis. And you make a comment then there about maintaining and suggest a more lax approach. I'm interested to know what consideration might be given in a more lax approach to preserve the natural habitat of the flora and fauna of the floodplains or wetlands, since a lot of the emphasis that we must put on things is related to wetlands.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Thank you. I mean, the lax approach, if you put it like that, I guess we're, you know, APL, it's very, you know, we're very much focused on the site at Ahunawai.
A more relaxed approach is maybe a better way of explaining it.
Yeah, it's I mean, for the Ahunawai site, it has very little wetland on the site. It's a dairy farm, so it's been farmed over many years. There's a lot of restoration plantings that are actually proposed across the site as part of the rezoning. The infill, if you'd like to, if I can put it in those terms, so the proposed infill at Ahunawai is restricted to the development areas, and so the lower lying parts of the site are very much left alone. So it's not a blanket earthworks approach across 178 hectares. It's the development has accounted for areas of lower lying areas, and that happens to coincide with the peat soils. And so where the site is low lying and closer to Lake Rotakawa, for example, those areas will actually be restored into constructed wetlands and wetland park and providing amenity and so forth. So I mean, I hope I answered your question in terms of this particular site.
Yes, you have, and just to background this, I am aware that when people, particularly developers, talk about rehabilitating a wetland or imagining it, if you like, quite often the natural fauna, particularly the bird life, completely disappears. And therein lies my concern, if you like.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. Yeah, I agree, and I just sort of have to make the point. There's very little out there at the moment. Just with the past land uses, in APL and the Comfort Group are really doing a lot. As you've heard in hearing 19, you know, there's been a lot covered in that regard.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you. I can understand your problem. You're worried about you've done all the work, but if rules are brought in, you might be caught retrospectively. So that's your main concern, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Mr. Cooney. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's sort of just keeping a watching brief on how these rules, you know, the objectives and policies and the implications for essentially resource consenting. You know, being optimistic. You know, it's about implications for consenting processes down the track.
It's sort of a broadly similar to, in a broad sense, to the rangatahi issue.
Yeah, I guess you can make that comparison. Yeah, it's yeah, with a sort of quite far advanced development. Clearly, they're they're operative. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think I have any questions either, Mr. Penfold, other than I know you make mention at the start about being patient about decisions on the Ohiniwai plan change proposal. Perhaps just suffice it to say at the moment that you don't have to be patient for very much longer, because that decision is imminent.
Great. Thank you for that brief update. Very much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Right, Mr. Mathers, please. Is Mr. Mathers here? Nice, there he is. You there, Mr. Mathers? Your sound and video are both turned off.
Has it come back on?
Your sound has, your video hasn't.
Oh.
Yeah, it doesn't give me an option to ask him to show video, so I would suspect he doesn't have a camera.
Don't worry, Mr. Mathers, as long as we can hear you, I think that'll suffice, rather than taking too much time trying to get the technology working.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thanks. Loud and clear.
Yeah, okay. Hey, Howdy, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. We spoke last time with the SNA. This mapping is a concern to us in the way that it's been presented in a way that it's a general assessment and not a specific site, which we are quite different to both our neighbouring properties. On the eastern side, you've got sand dunes going to the top of the escarpment, which is still grazed, which is understandable of a 200-metre setback. On the western side, there's a steep cliff faces with not a lot of vegetation on. So you would think that would be right for a 200-metre setback as well. We stopped grazing our property in the mid-90s and started our re-veg planting, which has started not far from the shoreline, and all the waterways and runnels from driveways have been planted and rocked, which are well established now. Also, we built a new house 20 years ago, which is 60 metres approximately from the shoreline. It has soil tests. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so that's.
Can you see that on the screen?
Yeah, the house is situated there, where the arrow is. No, up here. See there. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
So from the high tide, which will be down there, it's approximately 60 metres. And that has soil tests and geotech reports and building consents, which council have. Unfortunately, I don't have my copy of that because it got burnt in the wall fire, but I've asked Mark Mitchell to come up with it, and he's trying to find it at the moment. He has it in his file, but he couldn't find the hard copy this morning. But between us, we'll provide that. We've lived there 20 years, had a number of storms, number of torrential rain, still no effects to the landscape. We want to work with council with our future development, which is to put it into family titles, which will create a subdivision. And I will present a scheme plan in the next few weeks so we can all have a clear understanding what we want, and also some form of actual paperwork that council we can work together on. And maybe that's the way forward, instead of trying to debate over setbacks and that. At the end of the day, if we have to accept a setback and it's not a setback of 200 metres and it's not going to affect our development, we could live with it. But if it's going to make everything from that point on harder, we've got to somehow come to some negotiations with council. There's some boundary adjustments to do here as well, just through here. Taking that back to there, which we're in negotiations with Crusade Bible Camp at the moment to undertake once we engage surveyors. So yeah, it's unusual because the property, the 200 meters must come around like that. Must come from that point around, crossing over the bottom through the house. No, I think it comes higher. Oh, here it is here. Yeah. So if you go back to the map, yeah, it's a huge effect to the property, which, you know, there's no need for it, because in the 30 years we've owned it, Nee was saying there's been 100 meters rise in the sea level, but there's been no effect across the foreshore. So we're a third of the way through. So it doesn't seem necessary to have that size setback for us that have lived there, and we know the property pretty well, and the amount of work that's gone on. There'd be 60% of that property now back into re-veg native. So it's a considerable amount of work gone in there at the time we've done it, and we're looking forward. So this is quite an old photo. So this is planted from here right through here now, right, all this area here. From here right to here is planted. From across here to the skyline's planted. Right through here, there's from here right round, there's only a small platform there that's not planted. And it's all quite established now. The last lot of our planting is from here right up to here. It's all within 4 years, right up to here. So this is quite an old aerial map, but it shows you the boundaries. This from here to here is sand dunes. From here down, there's sand dunes to there only, and this is planted from here up to our boundary, right through to here, right up to here, or right across, right through. There's only a small area. There would only be a small area in there that's not planted. So, and the waterway goes down here, through here, down through this gully here, and that's planted and rocked. There's another waterway down here which links into here, which is planted and rocked as well. And even after this lot of rain we just had the last 2 days, there's no water running through here. So it's well absorbed through the land. But in midwinter it will flow. So it's not a huge flow point. Our main Wainui stream is back over here, which would, yeah, it's down through here, which must run through here. Gee, this is an old photo because this is all planted now. That's Fred's property there. No, that's Fred's there. So it runs across there. The stream runs through there, and it's all planted. But Fred's you can hardly see in there now, which, you know, we're pretty passionate about the property and don't want any major restrictions on the further development to get family back home. That's all I can say, really. We want to work with council. This could be a showcase to the subdivisions. You can't see either of our houses from the coast. They're naturally built, enclosed with trees. You still get enough view, and we would hope that the future development will be the same. We're builders in fishing, so work with the environment. Building not so, but we live in an environment that we want to protect, and it'll never get sold. We've got an agreement with the family. If it goes into titles and the children live there, which they will do, we've got a buyback in the family. So
okay,
it's not a commercial operation, not a commercial subdivision.
All right, no, I think we understand the point that you're making. Thank you. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Let's start with you, Mr. Fulton.
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Marg.
Thank you, Mr. Mathers. I have no questions.
Ms. Sedgwick.
Well, I understand your point. Thank you very much for taking the time to present to us.
Indeed.
Ms. Gibb?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you.
And I don't have any questions either. Thanks, Mr. Mathers. That's all very clear. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your time.
We're now due to hear from Mr. Cochrane for the Merrimiri Dragway, please.
Good morning. I'd like to carry out a visual and audio check.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Thank you. We can hear and see you. Thanks.
Fantastic.
So just restating that we have read your submissions and we're not expecting you to read them to us. We're just keen for you to give us a highlights package, please.
Okay, I'll go through and then highlight the key messages then.
Thank you.
So Merrimiri Dragway filed a submission seeking to remove the floodplain management area of the land that is protected by the Merrimiri West Drainage Area, which I'll refer to as the MWDA, and to map the land as a defended area. The Dragway continues to oppose the mapping of the land as a floodplain management area as its primary relief. Amendments are sought to the proposed provisions as alternative relief. The land located within the MWDA is protected from the Waikato River flooding by a continuous lower Waikato Waipa control scheme stop bank along the river and is drained by the Peters Pump Station at the north end and the Henry's Pump Station at the southern end. These submissions question the District Council's evidential basis for the imposition of the floodplain management area in respect to the land protected by the MWDA. The Dragway respectfully submits that the technical information provided by the Regional Council is generic and does not justify the imposition of the floodplain management area. Our legal submissions then set out the definitions of defended area and the floodplain management area as defined at section 15.14. I do not repeat the definitions in full, but note that the key distinction between a defended area and a floodplain management area is that a flood protection scheme protects land within a defended area from a 1% AEP event. Turning to the section 42A report, the District Council's report addressed the Dragway's relief at paragraph 511. I do not repeat that paragraph in full, but note that the section 42A report author's justification for rejecting the Dragway submission appears to be that a 1% AEP event would overtop the stock bank, which allegedly provides protection against only 10% AEP events. Ms. Carter advises that she obtained this information via discussions with the Regional Council. To ascertain the extent and content of Ms. Carter's discussion with the Regional Council, the Dragway made a Lagoima request seeking the information detailed of paragraph 10 of the legal submissions. The District Council's RM Policy Manager responded to the Dragway's request as set out in paragraph 11. I do not repeat the entire response, but draw the panel's attention to bullet point 5, which reads, the response from the Regional Council on submission point 215.1 was from Rick Leifting and Ghassan Bashir and is the only specific information Janice received from the WRC on submission point 2150.1 attached. The attachment referred to as an Excel document, and the technical input from the Regional Council in that document consisted of a single sentence, being, this is a drainage area with only a 10% AEP stop bank, so it is prone to a 1% AEP flood event from the Waikato River. A screenshot of that document is sent out in the legal submissions at paragraph 13.
Yeah, got that in front of us, thank you.
Fantastic. The Dragway acknowledges that the Regional Council provided the District Council with general information relating to flood hazards, and the Waikato Regional Hazards Portal identifies the MWDA as a defended area with only 10% AEP protection. However, the extent of the Regional Council's input specifically addressing the Dragway submission was a single sentence. No technical detail was provided in relation to the stop bank design or specifications, and the Dragway finds this lack of information concerning due to other Regional Council's documents, albeit one in a draft form stating that the stop banks along the main channel of the Waikato River generally protect against a 1% AEP flood event. The stop bank protecting the Merrimiri West Drainage Area bounds the main channel of the Waikato River. The Dragway accepts that it is appropriate to identify land as a floodplain management area where there is probative evidence the land is within the 1% AEP floodplain after taking into account flood defences. However, the Dragway submits that where the technical advice from the Regional Council underpins plan rules which have a significant effect on people's ability to use their land, that advice must be established through comprehensive and probative evidence. The Dragway submits that the evidential onus for justifying the imposition of the floodplain management area has not been discharged. It is submitted that there is nothing in the technical information provided by the Regional Council which assesses the stop bank design or its capacity to withstand against a 1% AEP flood event. It is submitted that with this information is not sufficient to justify the restrictions on the Dragway's use of the land. We've then set out the Dragway's primary relief, which is the deletion of the floodplain management area of the land that is protected by the MWDA, and to map the land as a defended area, as well as any consequential amendments required. We've also sent out alternative relief that the Dragway seeks, which is a bespoke rule be inserted into the Chapter 15 that allows for the defended area rules to apply to the land located within the MWDA if technical information is provided to the District Council stating that the stop bank protects against a 1 AEP flood event. We have then set out the proposed rule, which states activities within the floodplain management area identified on the planning maps located within the Meri West drainage area are to be subject to defended area rules where certification has been provided to the Waikato District Council by an appropriately qualified specialist with experience in hydrology. That land is to be protected from flooding during a 1% AEP flood event by a flood protection scheme managed by the Waikato Regional Council, the Waikato District Council, or the Crown. The proposed rule would provide certainty that the stop bank protects against a 1% AEP flood event. And it would also apply if the stop bank were upgraded by the Regional Council to protect against a 1% AEP flood event. This level of protection does not support the imposition of restrictions under the floodplain management area rules on the Dragway's use of the land. Instead, the defended area rules would be more appropriate because the land is a low hazard area by virtue of the stop bank. An information requirement of this nature necessitates an appropriate trigger, and the Dragway proposes certification by an appropriately qualified specialist with experience in hydrology. It is submitted that this trigger provides adequate certainty that development will be protected from the risk of flooding, and it is an efficient and effective method to include in the proposed plan. The proposed plan rule would greatly reduce the Dragway's consenting costs in respect of its land located in the floodplain management area. And then we have set out 2 examples to support that assertion relating to accessory buildings and earthworks, which would be permitted activities under the defended area rules, but a consent would be required under the floodplain management area rules. And they both relate to activities that are anticipated to occur at the Dragway. Thus, it is submitted that the proposed rule would enable the efficient and effective function of the Dragway by enabling anticipated activities without requiring unnecessary consent. So in conclusion, it is submitted that an insufficient evidential basis has been advanced for the proposed floodplain management area in relation to the land protected by the MWDA, and in the alternative, changes to the provisions are required in order to achieve a balance in recognising the legitimate interest of the Dragway to use its land for zone purposes. Does the panel have any questions?
I'm not sure, we'll find out. Let's see. Mr. Fulton, anything from you?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you. Understand.
Mr. Marg?
No, thank you, Mr. Cochrane. You're very clear. And thank you.
Ms. Gibb?
No, very interesting though. Thank you very much, Mr. Cochrane.
Ms. Sedgwick?
Do we have a map we can put up? I can't find one in anywhere here.
If it pleases the commissioners, it's Rick Lifting here. I do have a map of the area, including the stop bank performance criteria and drainage areas, if that will help.
That would be very helpful. Thanks, Mr. Lifting.
I'll also just start my video. Now I will just share my screen. Hopefully this works. can.
Yeah.
Yes, now well, it's just coming up.
How's that? How's that?
There we go. Yep, all good.
Lovely.
All right. So again, I'm just referring to our regional hazards portal in the area of concern. And just to clarify, Mr. Cochrane, is this the area that your submission is based on?
That's correct.
All right.
Great.
What do you want to,
What? So,
Ms. Sedgwick, what you've got the map? Let's.
so I'm assuming that that's the Waikato River around.
Yes.
Yeah, just to provide some context, here is the Waikato River. This is upstream is going, downstream is going to the north. The dragway area, you can see the dragway strip here, and also some other raceways and through here. The yellow area through here is the yellow strip here is the WRC managed stop bank, which includes a 10% AEP level of service from about here, and then a 1% level of service through here as well. In that area also is the Mary West drainage area as well, which shows our drainage scheme, including the pump station here.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I've seen it on the ground, but to see it like that is much more helpful. Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney?
Yes, where does that leave you getting this response at the moment? We've been told it is a 10%. I think your evidence was, well, it was just a couple of brief emails coming through, and that's not good enough. And I can understand your concerns, but we've now received confirmation from Mr. Lefting that it is a 10% level of service. So where does that leave you? Do you accept that situation and therefore the status quo, or do you still want to seek some other relief?
Well, the dragway is aware that there is the flood hazard portal identifies the stop bank of relevance as providing a level of service of against a 10% AEP event. However, the dragway hasn't seen any design specifications or stop bank kind of analysis that supports this assertion, and it's been and it's understood through other regional council documents that the main channel stop banks generally do provide a 1% AEP event level of service. So it's really questioning the evidential foundation of the regional council evidence that kind of underpins the plan rules.
So if Mr. Lefting went away and in his response, because I've got a right of response, comes back with some evidence to say, well, no, this is where the stop banks are constructed to. This is the level of service. That would be sufficient, and has documentation and hydrology evidence to support that.
Yeah, it all depends on the level of evidence that's supplied. If there is, technical assessment of the stop bank in question, I think it would be hard for my client to put forward an argument that an exception should be made in this case. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. And it's good to see Mr. Green is still drag racing, so that's good.
Yeah, sure is.
I've got a question just about the relief that you're seeking, and I might put that up if I could grab the screen, and that's obviously completely without prejudice to what our ultimate decision is, whether to accept or otherwise the recommendation that's been made. But just your proposal, can you see that now?
Yes.
Your proposal basically says it's deemed to comply with the defended area rules where certification has been provided to the district council by an appropriate specialist.
Yes.
Do you think, I mean, that basically says find a hydrologist, get them to write a letter, and automatically it's okay. If we were to take this approach, wouldn't it be more appropriate to say where certification has been provided by the district council following receipt of advice from an appropriately qualified specialist?
Yes, I think that wording would be acceptable.
My point being that, I mean, there's hydrologists and hydrologists, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on them, but someone certifies something. I mean, you criticised the regional council's response, and I mean that, don't mean that pejoratively by, you know, a one-line statement. Similarly, if a hydrologist that your client retained sent in a one-line email that said, yeah, it does, I'm suitably qualified, I've had a look at it, and yeah, it is, as drafted, that would be the end of the matter, which I would have thought might not really be sufficiently bulletproof.
Yeah, and that wasn't the intention of the rule. The rule was to provide certainty that it was up to standard, and I do recognise the loophole that you've identified here, and as such, I think the wording that you've suggested would provide, you know, an enhanced degree of certainty there.
All right, thank you. As I say, it's a hypothetical because we haven't deliberated on the matter at all, but I was just wanting to raise with you what your thought on that was. But thank you for that, and thank you for your submissions.
Okay, thank you.
Which brings us to the Raglan Collective Society, please.
Okay. Can you hear?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll try to coordinate things as well as we can, given that we're at various different stations. And I'm just, if I may, I'm just going to put up the screen share up. I'm imagining that I'm able to do that. Here we go. Why isn't that? Oh, okay, you're doing it.
So just to be clear, are you Mr. Harris?
No, sorry. I'll do an introduction now.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just that I can see your name, Chris, on the screen. But
yeah, no, I'm Chris Williams, and we have another person in the house who's Chris Harris.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for having us today. And I'm going to be I'm a continuity person for our presentation, and along with that, my wife Catherine and I, who's sitting here, will give our individual submission as it relates to our place in Wallace Street. But just by way of introduction, we have with us on screen Jackie Graham and Julie Nelson from 54 Wallace Street, Suzanne and Andreas Giesen-Prins from 56 Wallace Street, Joyce Davis-Goff from 58 Wallace Street, and Chris Harris from Lorenzen Bay with us. There may well be other people from the collective who are watching, but we're the people that are going to be speaking today.
All right,
we also have our legal counsel, Tom Benyon and Lisa Black from Benyon Law, who are going to submit as well. So just by way of background, once again, thank you very much for having us. And this is kind of a little bit of an issue, but anyway. So just as I say, we're the Raglan Collective, and we've kind of come together, I suppose, to have a collective voice, and also, I suppose, to have represent the individuals within the group as well. As we have been going about our work, other people have expressed interest in joining, and so our membership is likely to grow over that time. And I mean, the main thing we're here is to, I suppose, we want to have a conversation with you about some of the issues we see with regard to the modelling and the approach that's happened, and really an eventual conversation about the adaptive management of the sea walls. And so I'll just press on, and I'm going to be the guy that sort of flicks the PowerPoint over. And if this all goes well, that's not going that well, is it? Yeah.
Just while you're doing that, is the collective? You talk about the collective. Is its purpose? It's an incorporated society, as I understand it. Is its purpose related to these matters specifically, or does it have a wide mandate to look at all sorts of different things?
Tom, will you answer that?
Yes. Yeah, I'm just quickly pulling up the documents, but it's pretty much related to these matters.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just wanted to understand the background to the group. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to put up Tom's presentation, and here we go. Can we see that?
Yes, but it's very small.
I think
Commissioners
commissioners.
full screen mode and see how that goes.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Marginally. Needs to be a bit bigger, please.
I think if I just take you through it and we can send you a copy.
Have these haven't been pre-circulated, have they, in accordance with our directions?
No, they haven't. I apologize,
Really
but
just
they haven't.
morning?
We've been trying to understand how to coordinate to create a sort of a combined presentation and use the time efficiently.
Sorry, was this what came through this morning?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
You should have PDF versions through an email this morning. That's true of the PowerPoints and the and this PDF. But if I just address you on the key points anyway.
All right, that would be fine.
You could treat this as sort of backup reading if you like. So the collective has adopted the rules and is applying for incorporation. There's submissions and further submissions that you're familiar with. And the collective is fully appreciative of the council's intention to engage in adaptive management discussions and understands the rules allow for repair of the existing walls, and they look forward to those discussions and that engagement. I guess what they're seeking here is to push you a little further, if we may, respectfully, and have asked that the objectives and policies just explicitly recognise that historic seawalls on properties, long-standing seawalls, long-standing properties in the Raglan Harbour, which we currently know have no realistic alternatives, that the objectives and policies recognise that they are staying, so people don't have to step through discretion when they need to replace walls. So when it comes to replacement, the discretion would be limited to design, maybe improving public access, improving amenity, maintaining historic values, and all of those are the matters that come up in the coastal policy statements, rather than having in each case to sort of step through a existential exercise of does this wall stay or not. And we think this also applies, obviously this suggests that the council walls or walls on public land are going to stay as well. The Department of Conservation, just cutting to the chase, and council officers have sort of said, well, look, the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement discourages the use of hard protection. Understand that. We just want to say that response is a little generic. It doesn't appreciate the very specific areas that we're talking about, well in the harbour, long-standing subdivisions, long-standing walls. And we note that the policy statement, when you read it, talks about discouraging, reducing hard structures. It doesn't use the stronger term avoid, which you will be aware, of course, has had its issues since the King Salmon decision. We also suggest that the other policies in the New Zealand policy statement are relevant, which is policies about retaining heritage, policies about retaining amenity, and policies about public access. So those are all relevant. And that policy 27, for example, explicitly talks about, there are going to be occasions when hard protection structures are needed, for example, in relation to infrastructure. And I think a couple of submitters are going to point out some infrastructure that you're wanting to protect close to the shore. So there are, the National Policy Statement obviously anticipates situations with hard structures, and we think, and it has other values that are associated with hard structures that we think need to be considered. Turning to the regional policy statement, that seems to talk about avoiding, in terms of risk management, avoiding intolerable risks and taking intolerable risks back to tolerable levels. We're not dealing with a home Moana situation here. We're well inside a harbour. We don't have intolerable risk with these properties. So we're well within the risk management framework of the RPS anyway. We think the existing seawalls are necessary. That's the word used in the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. We also point out that the Section 32 report basically accepts that the policies, that the walls are going to remain. So it seems to us inefficient to require, having reached that conclusion, it's inefficient to require that to be tested, you know, in plan rules again, when we can come to the conclusion now. So just coming also to another practical consideration, and we're quoting the case of Browers and Street, which suggests that the council itself may not be able to, as a deliberate act, remove existing walls, because it might come up against rules of, you know, common law rules for support for neighbouring land. So it seems to us the council itself either has to repair its walls. We don't think it can really just allow them to degrade. There are a whole lot of amenity issues there, but there's also safety issues. So in a sense, we think practically the council's stuck with the public walls, and they're going to remain. Also, if walls do disappear in this area, you're going to have a very confused shoreline potentially, because you'll have parcels of private foreshore potentially coming up. So again, we're simply saying we think from all the information in front of you, the efficiency of Section 32 requires you to say, look, we do not require landowners to have to step through, as we say, a sort of existential exercise, discretionary consent every time they want to replace walls. They should just see that as it should be a controlled activity and managing matters of design and amenity. Then lastly, just to comment on the modelling, and we appreciate that you, you know, we understand at the meeting the other day, you were saying, well, I hope people are reading, I hope the Raglan people are looking at the recordings, and we did try to look at the recordings. I was trying several times last night. They kind of get stuck a couple of minutes in, so we couldn't go through them. So I hope this isn't repeating too much stuff or that you don't already know. It seems that the modelling that for the high-risk coastal erosion areas and for the coastal erosion flood sensitivity areas, it seems to take into account the seawalls in some respects, but it seems very unclear from the Section 32 report exactly how that occurs. And I understand there may be people who can assist us with this, but currently it appears that at least the private seawalls and possibly the public seawalls are somehow not being represented except minimally, but we potentially stand to be corrected on that. But one thing we do point out in particular is around the issue of inundation. And the Section 32 report seems to clearly say that for looking at inundation, the modellers have combined a very high tide, combined with a very large storm surge, combined with a very high sea anomaly. We're not sure that quite accords with what the Coastal Policy Statement 2010 requires. It talks about wave height. Anyway, they've come up with a 3 metre or 3.16 metre event, combining those 3 matters. The Section 32 report says, well, that happens less than once in every 200 years, which seems again to go beyond the 100 years window that you're meant to be looking at. And then you throw a 1 metre of sea level rise on that and you get the inundation. So we do think that needs to be rethought and recalibrated. At the end of the submission here, we're just noticing the Weir and Kapiti District Council case. Dr. Shand produced some numbers there. These numbers are more refined. It's obviously clear, but we don't think they're that much more refined. And there was some criticism in the Kapiti case and the suggestion that your RMA processes need to be a bit tighter, and we're suggesting that they do need to be, particularly in terms of that inundation calculation. We also note the caveats around the coastal inundation tool, which has been used as the sort of baseline tool. But those won't be, you know, these are parts of the package here that needs to be calibrated and thought about. I think what we're really driving at particularly is to say, look, for these properties, the risk is not intolerable currently. It's manageable. The tools are being a little over-egged and overused for some scenarios. You can call it for these properties right now and say that they can, they're going to stay. The walls are going to stay. And at the last part of the submission, we just note a decision in Eastbourne recently in March It's actually under appeal right now, but the general decision is standing. The details are being appealed, and that was the Eastbourne in Wellington, which you may be familiar with a road right on the coast, properties immediately behind. That decision, that's a decision report at the commissioner level, applying, of course, the coastal policy statement and regional policy statements are somewhat similar to yours, and somewhat similar to this region, and saying that it was sufficient in that situation to say, look, we're putting in seawalls for a period. They are not. That's not the end. We're just setting up for potentially adding to them later. So it's an incrementalist approach being taken right now in Wellington under its rules, but also under this national policy document and the national guidance. And we hope that gives you some comfort to think about the.
Presumably that case is in relation to the Eastbourne Road, though, that the properties are separated from the coast by. They're not immediately adjacent to private land.
Yes, that's quite right. But the decision makes the point that you're kind of quite jammed up. There's very little you can do. You want to protect the road, that's fair, that's infrastructure, not the private properties. And yeah, that makes a difference. It's not entirely the same.
All right.
But the incremental, the interesting thing in my view is the fact that they're not, they know that they're saying they can't retreat. Well, and Eastbourne landowners anyway, if the road goes, they can't retreat either. And they're suggesting that it's sufficient to simply repair the walls, replace the walls, a lot of them, for now, and accept, even with the diagrams and drawings and flood predictions they've got, that those will be overtopped, but they will come back to that, which I thought was an interesting response.
And I understand. Look, I don't think we'll ask any questions as we go. I think we'll get to the end once we've heard everything, because it may be that we ask a whole lot of questions related.
Yes, and the intention was simply to set the framework so that you can see where the submissions slot in. Thank you.
Right, so we've got, I think, Ms. Graham.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, Julie and Jackie, now away you go.
Kia ora, and thank you for the opportunity to present to the panel today. I note this is the final day of your deliberations, and I too have sat through a good number of hours of these hearings. My name is Julie Nelson, and together with Jackie Graham, we have owned 54 Wallace Street, Raglan, for the past 10 years. This is a picture of our home, and this is our seawall. It's a modest two-bedroom house and was originally part of the old factory site. We have ourselves extensively renovated the property with a new roof, restoring the lovely matai floorboards and installing solar power. We are part of the local Our Power network and proud that we were one of the first to join. We are active in our community, taking local action with our neighbours to support the maintenance of the environment, particularly the harbour area we live in. This picture is the consent given until 2049 for the repair of part of the seawall in front of our property. The wall, we understand, is over 80 years old and had huge rings on it where the boats tied up to the factory. This has taken its toll over the years. Look, at the time we approached council, we offered to buy the land and repair it ourselves. This was rejected. Then, because of the delays, we offered to repair it at our cost. This was rejected. Council eventually completed the plans, but it took 2 years. And emotionally, it was quite a stressful time for us. You will see this picture that we, our king gardeners, have implanted extensive native flax to bring the birds, particularly the tui and kingfishers, to enhance the environment. We're probably a little bit ahead of where my pictures are, but
oh, here we go. Sorry, Julie.
Just keep going. That's the seawall that took 2 years to actually get to being built.
Oh, there's your lovely garden. Sorry.
This is the picture from where king gardeners. Look, we've planted native flax that bring a lot of tui and kingfisher to enhance the environment. All of that front planting is on council land, and that we have developed and maintained the lawn and the garden and planting.
So is your boundary roughly on that photograph, sort of roughly where that line of trees is?
On part of it is, Mr. Chair, but then it cuts back again.
Okay.
So, yes.
No, that's right. So all that grass that we can see in that photograph, is that council land?
A good part of it is, but not quite up the front. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Righto. Thank you.
Look, at the moment, we are again talking with council. We have a garden wall, which you can see along there. We want to repair it at our cost. Look, this is not a sea wall, it's a garden wall, and we want to repair it like for like. We thought we should advise council, and we've been doing some minor repairs on that wall. Council visited us and instructed us that we can't start until they make a decision. Meanwhile, we've purchased the wood and the builder rings quite frequently to work out when you can start the job. But we want to work with council, but our experience to date has been that decisions take a really long time. Next one, Chris.
Are you done now, Julie?
Yeah, we have one of the largest seawalls on Wallace Street. We're on the estuary in the inner harbour. The area is used by families because it is so shallow and so safe. There are rarely waves. Over the side by the toilets, it's mostly calf level deep until the middle. On a high tide, the water at our wall is barely thigh deep. It's rocky with little sand. It's sheltered. It is not an open sea shoreline. At night, because it's so calm, it's a major area for floundering. Across the road, at a much lower level to us, is one of the major sewage plants. Last year, COVID meant that in my day job, my main priority was feeding and supporting vulnerable people. A letter came to us in August, right in the middle of COVID for us. The timing was poor and the letter was confusing. The result in this, that the modelling that was presented has put a red zone around our property. We don't agree with this, mainly because we are significantly higher than other identified properties, and this is not an open shoreline, it's a calm estuary. Also, other properties at our level have not been ring-fenced, so we challenge the modelling. It seems to us clearly wrong. Having lived through many storms at the property, the most you get is small to moderate wave splashes. During the 10 years we have lived here, we have seen very little difference year on year. But we're part of a thriving community who all look after each other. We're very diverse, and we're a community that actively wants to be involved in exploration, dialogue and decisions. In the forward in April 2019 to the Raglan Naturally Plan, Council wrote, Council acknowledges that a community-driven approach to provide input to council processes on matters that are important to Raglan is consistent with our desire for more inclusive engagement. These are our homes. This matters. This matter is important to us individually and as a community. The situation worries us and keeps us awake. Please hear us. Please involve us. We ask that there is a review of the modelling and that we ask that you work with us as a collective on an adaptive management plan that works for all parties. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Nelson. As I said, let's keep going, and I think we may cover very similar themes. And I know we're going to hear now from Mr. and Mrs. Geisen Prince, who I believe live right next door. So
they do. Over to you guys.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne, and with me here sits my neighbor, 58A Wallace Street, Joyce. Joyce is 90 years old. She has no, she doesn't want to speak, so I speak on behalf of both of our properties. Thank you for the opportunity for us to speak. So I live at 56 Wallace Street, and we have lived there for 20 years. We have lived in Raglan for 36 years. And Joyce has lived at her property for 30 years and lived in Raglan for 40 years. So there's quite a bit of history. We also own, Andreas and I, we own the dairy factory, which has a heritage listing. It's 58 Wallace Street, and traded as Raglan Joinery from there for almost 30 years. Our property are waterfront, and we are unsettled by the blanket approach to coastal properties and council attitude to seawalls and maintenance and flood protection. So I agree with Julie, we have sleepless nights and we don't need that. And my 90-year-old neighbor definitely doesn't need that. Our properties are situated behind the historic dairy co-op factory and was built in 1915, along with a seawall and concrete landing. And so 1915 makes it, how many years, whatever it is, it's a long time. And the boats were docked and delivered to on this landing to produce, to deliver their produce. It appears that the seawall was built by using the same construction method as doing the concrete walls in the dairy factory, shutters set up from rough sawn tundra planks filled with aggregate and steel reinforcing. And I have to add, we just had a $40,000 assessment of the factory for earthquake, and it got 100%. It was just a small area which built later, which was rated 30%. We have till 2055 to rectify that. Please see the attached picture. I don't know if there's a picture coming up with our seawall. The seawall along Wallace Street are of different designs and materials. Some have been there for generations and the age and construction method is hard to determine. Other walls have been rebuilt or strengthened in recent years. Most of the work has been done by individual property owners without council input or consultation. The seawall at our property appears to be built mainly with rocks, concrete poles, cement bags, and lots of concrete. The seawall at 58 Wallace Street, 58A Wallace Street, which is, yeah, this one. This is where the green boats were moored and delivered their goods. We have patched up a few places where some of our seawall at 56 Wallace Street, rocks and loosened after heavy pounding. And I guess we will continue to do so in years to come. And the heavy pounding is not big waves. It's just the continuous splashes, which of course weakens any structure. We have a saying in Germany that, you know, a drop of water can weaken anything if it's continuous. So we know actually feel very safe at our home. We have water inundation. We had under certain conditions, not at our place, but the Aro Inlet, which is on the other side. And but that's probably also the council is aware of that. We would like to see the provision in the proposed district land that allows property owners to maintain, erect or strengthen seawalls and protecting their properties. We have lived at our property for many years and we hope that our kids and grandkids will get as much enjoyment out of this place as we do. We would like to add that we are currently building a new house at our address after demolishing our old home last year. It was a bit of a process to get the permit for the new building. Only after we agreed to the council to register a notice under section 73 against our title, we have not yet, and we have not yet tried to insure actually our new house. It's still under construction and we don't know how the insurance company will actually assess us under these new circumstances. We also do not know whether or not the bank will be prepared to keep our mortgage facility on our place. We always had our private place as a mortgage facility in these changing circumstances. According to our lowest valuation, the council is still of the impression that the land is worth close to 1.3 million. And it comes to our surprise since the definition of land value is the bare piece of land without improvement. It's even more surprising that it appears council does not want to give us permission to protect our assets. And it's not interested to protect its own source of income. After all, our waterfront properties, and that is all in New Zealand are major contribution to council rates and revenues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's press on and carry through the rest. And I think this is Ms. Davis Goff's.
No, we're Chris and Catherine Williams first, and I'm just going to. These are the various properties along the waterfront, and we'll come to ours very soon. Our presentation, and that, by the way, is the new seawall that's built down by the wharf. That was part of the new walkway.
Yeah. Okay. I know we know where you are.
Yeah. Good.
I think is that. Yeah, I know exactly where you are.
Right. So we're Chris and Catherine Williams. We're here presenting on behalf of our family, our 4 kids, our daughter's partner, and our new grandchild who's just come to the world just more recently. Just by way of history, this is our picture of a house at 60 Wallace Street. It's a nice, tidy 3-bedroom house, and we have a self-contained unit out the back, which we've actually converted from the garage. And at the front there, we've built quite a nice deck that probably has one of the nicest outlooks in the world. My history is with this part of the world goes back a long way. I started coming to Wallace Street when I was 15 years old. In fact, we used to have holidays at the house right next door to us, number 62, with my family. A friend of my father's owned the house, and we used to come and go from there quite a lot. I remember even as a 15-year-old sitting on that deck thinking, this is just the most incredible kind of part of the world. You don't think too deeply about things when you're 15, but that is one of the things that really struck me back then. And then we've been coming and going from Raglan basically since we moved back to Hamilton in 1999 when we bought the business over here. And it was a big decision for us a couple of years ago to sell our family home in Hamilton, buy a house in Raglan, and have a kind of a more temporary existence here in Hamilton as we plan towards making a permanent move across to that neck of the woods. And I guess our aim, this is the first beach house we've ever owned, House of the Beach, and we aim for this to be our only one. We see this as being part of the legacy that we will leave behind for our kids, their kids, and on it goes from there. One of the reasons I put this photo of the house up is that just this kind of was shot not long after high tide on a higher than normal tide. As you can see, the high tide mark is just about there, and it's kind of on its way out now. So the tide line kind of varies from about where it is now up to this lower platform, which is about the highest it pretty well ever gets. And that was a couple of years ago. It kind of came over that platform. And in fact, at that time, it coincided with, it was around Easter time a couple of years ago, I think. There was actually a pretty big storm out in Tasman. And that was kind of the roughest that I've seen it get. And really, it's just gets very choppy. It doesn't, there's not big waves crashing over or anything like that. And it didn't appear to me, although I'm not an expert in these matters, that it was going to pose any undue risk to anything really. And not the least of which being the seawall itself. And I think the nearest we got to the water would have been some sea spray coming over the balustrade. And so that kind of then obviously subsided. Things when the tide went out, and it calmed down the following day. And so from our perspective, I guess we're here to kind of reinforce the points that Tom and the legal team made, and along with Suzanne, Andreas, and Joyce, and that we really want to kind of work together. We don't see ourselves being in a similar category to many of the other kind of coastal hazard areas, and we kind of want to work together. And certainly from our family's perspective, that's a kind of really important aspect for us as we look forward. I've just got a slide here. This is on the right is the view from the deck. I mean, it's just the most unbelievable part of the world. And we kind of see ourselves living out our days in Raglan in this very spot. And we just really hope that we can kind of come to a good agreement with this. I think the two things that haven't changed for me since I was 15 years old coming to Raglan is the character of the town, although it has changed a lot. The wharf is, got some shops and various other things, galleries and whatnot, but still kind of feels the same as it was. And I think the characters are also in abundance in Raglan. And as you can see, there's a guy who's decided to train for the Tour de Raglan on his bike just outside the house. And that's one of the great things that we can see from where we sit. In summary, thank you again for your time, just reinforcing all the points that have been made. And we would love to be working together to come together with a collective agreement.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Over to you, Chris. Hey, Chris. Are you in the house, Chris Harris? Are you mute?
No, it appears not.
Here I am.
Oh, there he is. Sorry, yes, he is.
Hey, Chris.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Kia ora koutou.
Could I just say, you just tell me when to flick the switch on the slides?
Shall do.
Thank you.
So kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I know it's been a long hearing for you. I've listened to much of the content. So I thought I'd start my presentation with a slide that you might find soothing and uplifting. There is a natural beauty to Raglan. Clearly, many people are drawn here. Many people are really passionate about the community, and I guess you've heard that through the various discourses today, particularly from the Raglan Collective. So I think we share one thing in common, is the love for Raglan and a particularly strong sense of community. So if you move to the next slide. So Google Maps isn't very good at resolution, but this is the best I was able to do. I'm going to be talking about the area of the sea wall that faces from Lorenzen Bay Road across to those trees which weren't able to be identified by Bronwyn Gibbard, but they are Pahutakawas. If you ever go past those Pahutakawas, you'll find a large number of kingfishers nesting in the wall. It's actually a beautiful little area. So we've lived here for 11 years. I've lived in Raglan for 23 years. And I guess, like many of us, it's probably the place that I'll be taken to my coffin from. So next slide, please. This is one of the early cottages built in the 40s. It belongs to Adam and Carol Marsh. It's actually listed amongst Raglan's famous batches. If you look at the frontage, you'll see there's a number of attempts at sea walls. One was by the owners, and then there's a striated wall behind that, which was built by the council. And part of that, and if you see behind that, just before their deck, there's a number of posts which have been built, put into the ground, which sets the demarcation between the Marshes land and public reserve land. And so that gives you a sense of, I guess, the shared investment by council in the past in terms of both protecting their land and also protecting the land of the residents. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see a wall that's been constructed, I assume, by council to assist the drainage from the creek, and alongside that creek is a public walkway. If you move to the next slide, please. So this gives, to the right of the slide is the area I've just described, which is the Marsh House. You can see the drain from the creek on the right-hand side. The house in which we live is the house in the centre, and that has a public walkway which adjoins from the stream. The adjoining property belongs to Tom and Helen Jowsey. They recently constructed that wall, and it was an area of some contention. And I think it's important to note that if any of these walls are breached, there's a rapid process that occurs. Once the water gets in behind the wall deteriorates very, very quickly. And that was the situation that Tom and Helen found themselves in that the tidal movement that occurred, while it wasn't particularly high, eroded the land and eroded the wall very quickly. And the wall essentially collapsed. And then there was an erosion that occurred of about 3 to 4 meters in the space of 2 weeks going towards their house. Tom approached the council for remediation. He was willing to do the work himself at his cost. The council, in his view, and I guess from many of our neighbours' view, were very slow in responding. He was seeking to protect his land, and he proceeded, because of the slowness in the consenting process, to simply build the wall, partly because people were wandering in his property because it was public access in order to get round the large breach that had occurred. So the reason that residents are concerned about repair of walls is that should there be a breach of the wall, things happen very, very quickly and don't sustain a rapid consultation decision-making process, because the tides tend not to give away to anybody. They will erode quickly. And the last slide you can see of the white post is the edge of the Lorenzen Bay Road. This is the wall that adjoins our property. As you can see, the public access way is very narrow. We maintain that, so our property boundary is on the wooden wall, and the council public access property is from the wall outside. We sought permission from the council to build the block wall, and that was granted. And that was partly just to give passers-bys or people using public access a bit more protection, because we felt they were very exposed when there were very, very high tides. Next slide, please. This gives you a view of the Lorenzen Bay Road. You'll also notice the paddling pool at the front. Now, that's been there for over 40 years. And I guess it's an indicator of the utilisation of Lorenzen Bay. Lorenzen Bay is very shallow. It's an area where a lot of people bring young families to bathe safely. And it is the only access point on this part of the harbour for boats and for cars. So it is quite a critical point of access for the local community. Next slide, please. So, you know, there is a sailing club. There's access from Lorenzen Bay Road from the end. If you were to look at this road on a sailing day, you would see it absolutely jam-packed full of cars with trailers, young children going out on sailing adventures, up to 20 boats. The local sailing club provides a trailer to give young people the opportunity to learn to sail. And this is the only access point for that area. People come swimming here because it is safe. They go out canoeing here because it is a protected harbour. This is a major walking area which gives access to the surrounding bays. So it is a really important access point for the community, not only as a public walkway point, but also as a parking point and also access point for the many activities that people enjoy. Next slide, please. You know, there has been one flood event in the 12 years we've been here, and that was well documented. The reality of a flood event is it is accompanied by three factors: a very deep low depression, we're talking about probably less than 970 millibars, northeast gales, and a king tide, and the last one occurred on a moon tide, blue moon tide. In order for flooding of this nature to occur, all three factors need to come together, and that's actually very rare. On a normal king tide, it won't move over the wall. Sometimes you get some wave splashing when you get a northeast gale, and sometimes you get some elevation of water in a deep low depression. But for flooding to occur, all three factors need to come together, and that's an extremely rare event. Next slide, please. One of the things we are concerned about in Lorenzen Bay is the change that has occurred to the stream over time. This is a picture of the public access way. which joins Cambray Road and Lorenzen Bay Road. You'll see on that track some people with umbrellas and young children contemplating moving across that bridge, which is in flood. That didn't used to occur. There has been a significant amount of increased water flow, particularly during storms, over the last 10 years. So, and when flooding does occur, it isn't from the sea, it is from the stream. And so to some extent, there is consequential risk that's been created for people in the lying areas of the coast, caused by flooding from substantially changed residential zoning and development that occurs upstream. So this is a problem that we share with the council and which the council has some responsibility for. Next slide, please. So there are two slides that I'm going to conclude with, one of which relates to Lorenzen Bay. You know, we are a close community. When you see the information that's presented by planners, it tends to get reduced to property numbers, but these are real people who have had very long experience of living in this area from the time that Frank Lorenzen owned the farm and subdivided his property. As other presenters have said, there's a long history here. There are generations of families. My own family have aspirations to live here so that my grandchildren can come to enjoy the views that you saw on the first slide. Hard walls and structures have always been part of the solution of managing high water risk. There is a desire to partner with the council and possibly with shared investment in an adaptive management plan that is considered. Now, I think we need to think about a managed plan that's not about managed retreat, but about planned retention. Because it's not just retaining the public access way, it's not just retaining some of the property frontages, it's also retaining the road. You know, at the end of the road, there is a sewage pump station. Councillors and commissioners will be very aware of the sensitivity that's felt by both iwi and residents about sewage leaking into the harbour. There is a real risk if a managed retreat occurs that the impact will be significant for that sewage pumping station, which lies right at the bottom of the road. I think that doesn't seem to have been considered in any planning process or any decision making to date, and that yet is a real concern. The stream water volume fed by upstream activity is significant. All residents will say it has increased over time, and I think that needs to be assessed separately by council. Finally, you know, Raglan, in the time that we've lived here, has changed immensely. It is very, very well visited, not only by Hamilton visitors, but by Auckland visitors. And on weekends, it's very hard to find a park. The overflow of that actually finds its way to Lorenzen Bay because for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, that it's actually a very safe place for young families to come. We just need to find ways to ensure that we plan for a future that is appropriate for our grandchildren, for Lorenzen Bay grandchildren. Okay, moving to the last slide. So, key points that we'd like you to consider. Let's improve Raglan tourist and community access. Let's not just take a defensive, risk-averse approach. Let's look at opportunities. And in terms of any adaptive management plan, we want to take an approach that actually views opportunities rather than just views risk. There are consequences to both. We need to look at the positive consequences that can come from a visionary approach to what we have as a shared problem. Hard walls should continue to be part of the solution. Local residents will consider co-investment in an adaptive management plan. I don't think the community is saying this is just council's problem. We have a shared need to address any sea level rise. And if it requires investment, let's look at co-investment. There's been a number of examples of that occurring. You know, the most recent one that I've looked at is Lake Tarawera, where local residents and councils came together to look at how they could manage in a shared investment pathway to manage a common problem. There is a need to review the models. Much has been talked about in terms of perhaps the modelling being a bit extreme. I think there is as Tom has pointed out, a need to reconsider the models and see whether in fact what's been put forward in the planning process is as accurate as it needs to be. And finally, you know, we can learn from other coastal communities that have developed both tourist generating and community serving solutions. We've talked about a number of places today, you know, the places that come to mind are Taranaki. Certainly the areas such as Onehunga have been significant, Mount Maunganui and Eastbourne. All of those areas are taking an approach which is creative and not just managing immediate risk. And I'm keen that we can work together with the council for the future to develop adaptive management plans that are going to allow us to consider a planned retention of what are significant community assets and tourist assets for the future. Thank you, and thank you for your time listening to our combined presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just say at the outset, I mean, some of the things that you're asking us to do, as you will have heard me say earlier today, are beyond the remit that we have in relation to considering submissions on the district plan. We're not able to require the council to undertake a co-design approach with you of the sort that you've said. Our role is confined to defining the objectives and policies and rules of the plans, of the district plan, which includes the lines and those sorts of things. So, I mean, I think we understand the point that you're making about further engagement and et cetera, and the points that you've made are well made. But you will have heard the questioning that we had earlier of some of the other folk, and I won't repeat myself, but some of the things that you're asking us to do, we're just simply not in a position to be able to do. What we are able to do, though, is to consider the submission points around, is it appropriate to maintain and enhance existing defence structures and what the activity status for them should be, those sorts of things. But the requirements for ongoing liaison between the council as the owner of some of these assets and yourselves is a matter that extends beyond our remit, as you will have heard me say earlier. So I just want to make that point before we proceed. But I just want to see now if there's any questions from the panel. Ms. Sedgwick?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to thank everybody for their very full and very clear submissions, and also recognise the passion that you have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gibb.
Yes, I'll endorse Commissioner Sedgwick's comments. The very clear verbal and pictorial presentation is appreciated because it does give us a really good sense of your challenges. as Commissioner Mitchell said, there's so much we can do under this regime. But as a current councillor, I can't not know what you've told me, which is an interesting thing. And we have our colleagues that we can speak with. We're all for partnerships within council, but we do appreciate things take time, and there are many reasons, whether you like them or not, as to why they take time. But thank you so much. I do appreciate you've put a lot of effort into this, and very professional presentation. So thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Mark, any questions?
Yeah, look, again, just to endorse what's already been said, thank you for the collective approach and the PowerPoint and your professionalism you displayed. I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton.
Probably not a question so much as just looking at the policy 15.2.1.8 on the limitations of hard protection work along the coastal hazard mitigations and so on. I just had a read of that while we were having this presentation, which I thought was very, very well presented. Thank you very much on the way it was done. Realising how much wall is there, it did actually surprise me, because I wasn't of the understanding that it was as much as there was. Yeah, I've just had a look at that, and I don't think we can do anything with that, but it's just interesting to see how it's been explained there. So, no, that's the only comment I'd need to make on that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. One of the, just adding on what the chair has said, one of the issues you've got, of course, is a lot of this land between your property and the sea is owned by the council, and therefore whatever we come out with by way of rules and policies and so forth, and we make it, we've got to decide whether we make it more enabling or whatever. But as the consent, any consent you get to that you apply for, or wish to apply for, you've still got to get the council to agree, because they own the land on which the wall will be probably built on or abutted against. So I just want to make it clear that any planning consent you get to replace a wall, you still need to get the council to give approval for you to apply for that. So just make that clear. Just one of the other, getting back to you, Mr. Benyon, you're seeking policies that will make replacing seawalls easier. Is that what you're looking at there? I haven't read your legal submissions. I intend to do so, but is that what you're seeking?
Yes, just so that yes, so that the it's a controlled activity essentially, and that focuses on, and I think you can see from the pictures, focuses on, whether the seawall can enhance diversity, amenity issues, any historic heritage in the wall, and those sorts of matters, so that it shifts the discussion, because the theory is that we have enough information now to know, and you can see from the pictures that you can make a call now in these particular areas, even with your inundation calculations and what the infrastructure is, etc., that walls will remain. So you may as well, Section 32 efficiency sort of reasons, just go there now.
So your replacement wall would in fact be a new seawall, wouldn't it?
Yes, well, you can imagine, I guess there's an interesting question, isn't there? How far is maintenance replacement? But I think from something Mr. Wallace said, I think you might need to replace, you might need to have a wall just near, maybe one forward or back from where it currently is. So we notice that the policy currently permits repair and maintenance, but doesn't go as far as replacement. When looking at some of those walls, I would think that a replacement is a much cleaner solution. And focusing on its design and appearance would be useful if those were the
from my experience of this issue, you need an integrated approach to seawall building. Otherwise, you get erosion behind one wall and etc. So it's more likely to be to extend along the perimeter of a number of properties. So you need, so you're saying really, well, if it's a replacement wall, it should be, I think at the moment it's discretionary. You're wanting that to be controlled.
Yes, so all we're wanting to take out of the equation is the not having to go through the the exercise, the esoteric exercise or philosophical exercise of, oh my goodness, do we all need to, is this retreat? Because it's so apparent in these areas from those pictures that one property, you can't call retreat or advance for one property. You have to take an integrated approach. So we may as well take that element of the discretion off the table and leave the discretion in the area of how does your wall and your replacement join or potentially join with the others along this area or integrate with others.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it as simple as that? Isn't it? There are other methods of design. There may be stormwater contributing problems. So one of the things you might have to look at is to do away with stormwater discharges into the vicinity of the area. There's all those issues that need to be considered holistically. So is a controlled activity sufficient to really look at all those wider issues and other alternative options?
Yes, I guess we're simply wanting to take off the table in the application for, say, replacement of a wall. We're wanting to take off the table the requirement to go and get a hydrologist to sort of pretend this looks like Home Moana or something and decide whether or not the house needs to disappear. Because that just doesn't, in this very close situation, just seems like a requirement that has little sense. The argument, the answer you're going to get is the answer you in effect already have from the Section 32 reports, which is that in these areas, these properties are going to seek to replace walls, and the council itself as well. We just put in a wall that runs to the 2040s. So if you're going to do that on the corner of Wallace Street there, it's pretty obvious what's coming down the line for these properties in the next 10 to 15 years and 50 plus years probably.
So where's the distinction between controlled? You've still got to get your consent, and I know you've got to get it granted. You'll get it granted, compared to a restricted discretionary status, where the discretion is targeted to, the particular issues for that, for erosion, coastal erosion.
Yes, I accept that if you could get to something similar with a restricted discretionary activity. I'd have to talk to the collective about this, but we've pitched it as control. But I accept that a restricted discretionary, we were restricted just to perhaps those design and other matters, infrastructure, etc., might achieve something similar to what we're talking about.
Yeah. Does your client, does your clients, they're wanting an easier pathway, really? That's what, but they accept that there's got to be some planning controls over this issue. Do they accept that proposition?
Yes, that's the controls. I mean, you'll see all the discussion for people to say those discussions with the council we want to have. I don't think anyone here has built an illegal seawall. People are saying, well, I've got my frustrations, but I am approaching the council. I hope that relationship can improve. The usual sort of concerns about speed, etc. But there's full appreciation that some control is required. The real thing is not to have this sort of sword of Damocles hanging over them with a fully discretionary consent that potentially somebody looks at and says, well, this means you might never get your replacement wall. I can't say for sure. And while we know from the information we have at the moment, that is highly, highly unlikely, I think in the fully discretionary state, there is no need, under a solid Section 32 analysis, to leave that discretion in play. It just causes real sleepless nights, literally.
Yeah, yeah, I've been involved in a few of those cases over the years where I had one case where 5 coastal scientists said, unless you build the seawall, all these properties will fall into the sea. The court had no other option but to grant those consents. Yeah, even though there was argument about managed retreat and all those sort of things, the economic consequences are quite significant when you look at the realities of it.
Yes, and I think if you look at you're guided, of course, by the Section 32 report you've got, and I've quoted a section of it, which is good as says. What else are you going to do? You don't really have, you've got infrastructure close to the shore, you've got roads and these properties right there. The information, the evidence you've got already kind of gets you to that conclusion. As I say, it's trying to sort of say this isn't homeowner, and I haven't been called by the homeowner people to represent, did you? But it's a very different scenario from the sort of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement is trying to set a very high level for the whole coast. But the differences and subtleties along the coast need to be appreciated, and they're obvious here.
Yeah, and I'm also aware there's people in the community who oppose sea walls because it raises beach profiles and there's nowhere to walk along the foreshore and that type of argument.
Yes, and I've suggested that you could get to an odd situation where if seawalls disappear or fall away, you're going to actually create private foreshore titles or a potential sort of odd patchwork, which might not help with public access either. You might have an owner who's lost their front lawn and insists on keeping a sort of a ragtag fence right out in the edge of their property that for everybody else looks like an area of foreshore they should be able to walk along.
Yeah, prescriptive rights. Yep. Okay. Thanks very much. It's an issue that doesn't just apply to this area or to the Waikato. It's a big issue that applies throughout the country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Cooney. I don't have any questions, thank you. I think what you've asked for is very clear. Mr. Cooney's asked a number of contextual questions that cover what I would have asked. So I'd conclude by thanking you and you folk in particular for your submission, but also for those that have presented to us earlier in the day and earlier in the week. So that's the end of the people that have requested to be heard. So on that basis, we'll adjourn. We're issuing our decisions on the district plan as a package throughout the whole plan, so there won't be a decision coming out in short order in relation to this topic. Everyone's been patient to now with the district plan process, and there's going to have to be a little bit more patient until our final decisions are implemented. As is our normal practice, we are asking council staff to provide written reply statements to see whether anything's changed in their view since having heard the material presented to us during the course of the hearing. We will ask that, perhaps through Mr. Taylor, but not now, to confirm via information provided to the hearing secretary of the time frame for doing that, and Mr. Bell can then inform us in due course of the timing for that. So without any further ado then, we will adjourn today, but if the panel wouldn't mind just holding fire for a few minutes, but everybody else, if you could please log out, and thank you once again for your appearances.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.